The ad had been deceptively simple. Interpreter needed. Italian, Russian, Mandarin fluency required. Discretion paramount. Compensation exceptional. Apply in person. Meridian Tower, Suite 4800, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Asterisk. No company name, no contact number, no LinkedIn page to cross-reference at midnight when sensible people were sleeping, and Valentina Greco was eating cereal at her kitchen counter, squinting at her laptop screen, and wondering whether the 3 languages she'd spent the better part of her 28 years cultivating were finally going to amount to something more than corporate conference calls and the occasional UN subcommittee meeting. She'd circled the ad 3 times in the digital margins of the freelance board, the way you circle the name of someone you aren't sure you should call. Then she'd closed her laptop. Then she'd opened it again. Then she'd applied. Now she stood in the elevator of Meridian Tower, with her black portfolio clutched against her chest, watching the numbers climb. 44, 45, 46, and trying to remember every piece of advice her mother had ever given her about rooms full of powerful men. Keep your eyes up and your opinions to yourself, Caterina Greco had said once, adjusting young Valentina's collar before her first piano recital. Men with money don't want to hear what you think. They want to hear what they already believe, said back to them in a prettier way. Her mother had been talking about the music faculty. She hadn't known she was writing the instruction manual for her daughter's entire career. The elevator opened onto Suite 4800, and Valentina stepped out into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone with an excessive budget and a personal vendetta against warmth. Everything was white marble and black glass. The art on the walls was the kind that cost a great deal, precisely because it communicated nothing. A woman sat behind a desk that was wider than Valentina's apartment, with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass and an expression to match. "Valentina Greco," Valentina said. "I have a 10 o'clock." The woman looked at her the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, not unkindly, but with clinical detachment, cataloguing what was there and what wasn't. "Your credentials were reviewed," she said. "Please take a seat." Valentina sat. There were 4 other candidates in the waiting area, all of them impeccably dressed, all of them clutching portfolios or tablets, or the particular posture of someone who has trained for exactly this moment. She recognized the look. She wore it herself. The look that said, "I am qualified. I am composed. I have nothing to fear." And underneath all of that, the quiet animal terror of wanting something badly enough to lose sleep over it. She had lost sleep over this one. She wasn't sure why. They called her in last. The office beyond the frosted glass doors was not what she expected. It was warmer than the reception for one. Actual wood panelling on one wall, an antique globe in the corner that looked as though it had been touched by centuries of real hands. The desk was dark mahogany, enormous, and behind it sat a man who was not looking at her. He was looking at the city. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows with his hands clasped behind his back, and for a long moment he didn't turn around. And Valentina had the disorienting sense that she was being made to wait on purpose, not because he hadn't heard her enter, but because he had, and he wanted those extra seconds to be his and not hers. Then he turned. Later, she would struggle to explain the specific quality of Luca Ferrante's attention. It was not the attention of someone who looked at you. It was the attention of someone who read you, efficiently, completely, in the way a master chess player reads a board, identifying every strength and every liability before making a single move. He was, by any objective standard, a beautiful man. Dark hair cut close and precise, eyes the colour of deep water in winter, not quite blue, not quite grey, just the shade that exists in the space between certainty and ambiguity. He wore a charcoal suit that had clearly been made for his specific body by someone who understood that fit was the difference between clothing and armour. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s perhaps, with the kind of face that had lived enough to have depth without losing the architecture of youth. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before he spoke. "Siediti," he said. "Sit down." She sat, then caught herself. "You could have said that in English." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, an acknowledgement. "I could have," he said. His English was accented but flawless, the kind of Italian-inflected English that had clearly been smoothed and polished by years of international business, without ever losing the music underneath. "I wanted to see how quickly you responded." "And?" "Immediately." He walked to his desk and sat. "Without thinking. That's what I need. Someone who doesn't have to translate in their head first." He opened a folder and glanced at it with the brisk efficiency of someone who had already memorized its contents. Valentina Greco, born in Rome, raised in Chicago from age 7. University of Chicago, double major in linguistics and international relations. 4 years with the State Department, 2 years freelance. Italian, Russian, Mandarin, some French. He looked up. "Why did you leave the State Department?" The question was direct and landed like a dart. She had a prepared answer. She always had a prepared answer, because the question always came. But something about the way he was looking at her made the prepared answer feel insufficient, like bringing a printed map to someone who navigated by stars. "I found their definition of discretion somewhat flexible," she said instead. Something shifted in those winter water eyes, interest maybe, or just the recalculation of a man who had expected one kind of answer and received another. "This position requires a different kind of discretion," he said. "I assumed." "You understood." He said it as a correction, and she felt it land with the precise weight he intended. There was a difference, he was telling her, between assumption and understanding, and he was a man who dealt only in the latter. "The role involves facilitating communication in private business negotiations," he continued. "Some of these conversations will take place in settings that are not conventional meeting rooms. Some will occur at irregular hours. Some will involve parties whose English is limited by choice rather than ability." He paused. "You will interpret only what is said. You will offer no opinions, no editorializing, no additional commentary. You will not repeat what you hear, to anyone, for any reason." "That's standard for the position," she said. "This is not a standard position." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable so much as instructive. He was waiting to see whether she would fill it with nervous reassurance or unnecessary questions. She did neither. She held his gaze and let the quiet exist between them like a third person in the room. "When would I start?" she asked. "Monday," he said, "if you accept." He slid a contract across the desk. She picked it up and read it. Actually read it, top to bottom, every clause and subclause, while he watched her with what she would later identify as the first of many expressions she could never quite fully decode. When she reached the compensation section, she kept her face carefully still, though the number on the page was more than she made in 6 months. "There's a non-disclosure clause," she said. "There are several. This one specifies penalties for any disclosure relating to—" She paused, reading carefully. "The identities, business relationships, operational specifics, or personal information pertaining to any individual encountered in the course of employment." She looked up. "That's unusually broad. My business requires it." "What is your business, Mr. Ferrante?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Import and export," he said, "among other things." It was not a lie, exactly. She understood that even then, in the clean white office with its antique globe and its mahogany desk, before she knew anything at all about Luca Ferrante. She understood that he had given her the shape of a truth without its substance, and that she was going to accept it, and that some part of her, some quietly reckless and deeply curious part that had never quite been satisfied by the careful corridors of the State Department, was glad. She signed the contract. He watched her do it without any change in expression. Then he took the paper back, examined her signature with the same contained attention he gave to everything, and said, "Monday, 8 a.m. Dress appropriately." She stood, smoothed her jacket. "Appropriately for what?" "For a room where everyone is watching," he said. She left without another word, and she didn't allow herself to look back as she walked through those frosted glass doors, because she had the distinct and unsettling feeling that if she did, she would find him still watching. Not the door, but the space where she had been, as though she had left an impression in the air that he wasn't quite finished reading. In the elevator, going down, she pressed her back against the wall and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Monday, black tie, bring both your Italian and your patience." She stared at the text for a long time. Then she saved the number under a name she would later find darkly amusing. "Trouble," she typed, and hit save. Monday arrived the way all consequential Mondays do, with the particular cruelty of clear skies and brilliant light, the universe's way of ensuring you had no meteorological excuse to stay in bed and reconsider your choices. Valentina spent the morning in front of her closet with the focused dread of a general surveying an inadequate army. Dress appropriately. For a room where everyone is watching. She settled on a dress the colour of deep ink, not black, but the navy that approached it in low lighting, structured at the shoulders, conservative in length, elegant without being ornamental. She twisted her dark hair into a knot at the base of her neck, and wore the pearl earrings her grandmother had left her in a will that had contained very little else. Her grandmother had been a woman of extraordinary economy. In 27 years of marriage to a man who spoke mostly in silences, Nonna Inez had learned to communicate entirely in gesture, implication, and the occasional devastating glance. "Pearls," she had told Valentina once, "are what you wear when you want to be taken seriously without looking like you're trying." It was the best career advice anyone had ever given her. The car arrived at 7:45. A black car, of course. The driver was a broad-shouldered man named Marco, who offered her a single word of greeting in Italian and then addressed her through the rear-view mirror only when necessary, which suited her perfectly. She watched Chicago pass outside the tinted windows, the lake in the morning, steel grey and vast, and reviewed her mental lexicon of financial terminology in 3 languages, the way other people reviewed their notes before an exam. She was not nervous. She told herself this several times, with the diligence of a mantra, until the car pulled up to a building in the Gold Coast that had no signage whatsoever on its exterior, and 2 men in dark suits opened a door that had no handle on the outside, and she revised her position on the question of her own nerves. Inside was a dining room that looked like it belonged in a Milanese palazzo from the 17th century and had been transported wholesale to Chicago at considerable expense and with complete disregard for its cultural displacement. The ceiling was frescoed. The table could seat 20. Currently, it was set for 8, with crystal and silver that caught the candlelight. And there were candles, despite it being 9 in the morning, because this was the kind of room that operated on its own relationship with the natural order of things. Luca was already there. He stood at the far end of the room, in conversation with a man Valentina didn't recognize, 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of expensive tan that came from actual sun rather than a booth, and the compact, coiled energy of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms where decisions were made that cost other people sleep. Luca spoke in low tones and didn't look up as she entered, but she had the immediate, inexplicable certainty that he had clocked her arrival before she'd crossed the threshold. A younger man materialized at her elbow, 20-something, dark suit, with the precise blank helpfulness of someone who had been trained to anticipate rather than react. Miss Greco. He spoke in Italian. I'm Nico, Mr. Ferrante's assistant. Today you'll be interpreting between Mr. Ferrante's party and our guests from Vladivostok. They prefer Russian. Their English is sufficient, but they use it strategically. He said this last part with a delicate emphasis that communicated volumes. Mr. Ferrante will indicate when he needs you. Otherwise, remain present but unobtrusive. Unobtrusive. She filed that word away, next to all the other organizational directives she'd ever been given by men who considered the ability to translate human language between cultures an administrative function. Understood, she said. The Russians arrived at 9 on the dot, 3 men and 1 woman, all of them dressed with the particular severe elegance of people who wore money the way other people wore armor. The woman was perhaps 50, with close-cropped platinum hair and eyes the colour of a winter Baltic Sea, and she was clearly the most dangerous person in the room, though she entered last and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Her name, Valentina would learn, was Irina Volkov. The meeting began with the rituals of powerful people encountering one another. Handshakes, the presentation and exchange of business cards, performed with the gravity of a sacrament, the opening volleys of small talk that weren't small at all. Valentina stood slightly behind and to the right of Luca's position, close enough to speak into the necessary silences, far enough to remain, as instructed, unobtrusive. The first 40 minutes went smoothly. Trade routes, logistics contracts, the navigation of certain regulatory environments. She relayed it all with clean precision, the bilingual machine her training had made her, impartial and invisible. Then Irina Volkov said something. She said it in Russian, quietly, to the man on her left, and she said it with the casual confidence of someone who didn't believe anyone else in the room would understand. Valentina's pen stopped moving on her notepad. What Irina said, translated with scrupulous accuracy, was, "Tell Mikhail that the Chicago arrangement is in place. The storage facilities are confirmed. The other matter, the one with the senator, we'll discuss after dinner when the girl isn't in the room." Valentina's phase did not change. She had spent years learning the professional discipline of the interpreter's phase, a phase that received everything and reflected nothing, a mirror that translated without editorializing. Her expression in that moment was as smooth and still as the surface of a lake with considerable depth and turbulence underneath. She did not translate what Irina had said. She couldn't, precisely. It had been a private aside, not directed through the negotiation, but more to the point, she was still processing what it meant. The other matter, the one with the senator. Storage facilities confirmed. She continued her work with the exact same measured fluency she'd been demonstrating all morning, and she did not look at Luca Ferrante. But he looked at her. She felt it, the quality of his attention shifting, focusing, the way you feel the change in temperature when a cloud passes between you and the sun. He said something in English to the silver-haired man, gestured toward a document on the table, kept his gaze on the papers. But the attention she felt on the side of her face was not from someone reading documents. The meeting broke for a coffee service at 11:15. The Russians gathered at one end of the room. The silver-haired man, whose name was De Luca, she'd gathered, Salvatore De Luca, and he was addressed with the specific deference that suggested he sat at a considerable altitude in the room's pecking order, stepped outside to take a call. Valentina was reaching for a cup of espresso when she became aware that Luca was standing beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. She would become accustomed to this, the fact that he moved through space with the unhurried silence of something very large and very capable, the kind of silence that was not absence of sound, but mastery of it. "You understood something," he said, quietly, in Italian, for her ears only. It was not a question. She turned to look at him, and the proximity caught her off guard. He was closer than expected, looking down at her with those deep water eyes, and there was something in them that she had not seen in the office on Tuesday. Not quite suspicion, something more complex, something that assessed threat and possibility simultaneously, and hadn't yet decided which she represented. "Mrs. Volkov made a comment," Valentina said carefully, "in a side conversation, not directed through the negotiation." "I know." He picked up his own espresso. "What did she say?" Valentina looked at him. She thought about the non-disclosure clause, the size of the number on her paycheck, the 6 months of rent it represented, the careful and specific architecture of the life she was trying to build. She thought about her mother's voice. "Keep your eyes up and your opinions to yourself." "She said she wanted to discuss something after dinner," Valentina said, "when I wasn't in the room." It was not the whole truth. She had never, in her professional life, given less than the whole truth in an interpretation. She was aware of this compromise in a way that sat uncomfortably, like a small stone in a well-made shoe. Luca looked at her for 3 long seconds. "She said that in Russian," he said. "Yes." "Assuming you wouldn't understand?" "Yes." He sipped his espresso, set the cup down. The lines of his face were composed, unreadable, the careful blankness of someone who had spent considerable time learning how to give nothing away. "From now on," he said quietly, "you will relay everything you understand, every side conversation, every whispered exchange, everything. He paused, even things that weren't meant for me. That's not standard practice for an interpreter, she said. I told you. His eyes found hers. This is not a standard position. He moved away before she could respond, rejoining the silver-haired Luca with the fluid ease of someone accustomed to leaving conversations at the exact moment of his choosing. Valentina stood with her espresso and her discomfort, and the persistent gathering feeling that she had just signed up for something considerably more complicated than the facilitation of import-export negotiations. The Russians, regrouping at the other end of the room, were speaking quietly among themselves. Irina Volkov caught Valentina's eye across the length of the table, and something passed between them, not recognition exactly, the animal awareness of one cautious creature for another. When the girl isn't in the room, Irina had said. Valentina looked into her coffee. She was beginning to suspect that being in the room was going to be the most dangerous part of this job. 3 weeks into her employment with Luca Ferrante, Valentina had accumulated the following facts with the diligence of a scientist cataloguing a new and potentially toxic species. He kept 4 phones. One was the public-facing device, sleek, silver, occasionally in evidence during meetings. The other 3 were tools of a world she was only beginning to see the edges of, each one used for a distinct subset of communications that never crossed over, like separate lanes of traffic that happened to run through the same man. He spoke 6 languages fluently. She had confirmed this by the end of the first week. Italian, English, and French she had expected from his background. Milanese family, educated in Geneva, significant time in New York. But the Russian that emerged when the Volkov party returned for a second meeting was not the halting, functional Russian of a businessman who had taken a crash course. It was deep and idiomatic and precise, the Russian of someone who had learned it young and in intimate proximity. And the Mandarin he used in a phone call she overheard through an inadvertently open door was so natural and unhurried that she'd stood in the hallway for 3 seconds, genuinely disoriented about where she was. He already knew the languages. This realization arrived on day 11, quietly devastating in its implications. He had hired her, knowing she could understand everything. She sat with that knowledge, the way you sit with a piece of information that reorganizes the entire room you're standing in. He wasn't using her as a tool for comprehension. He already had comprehension. He was using her for something else. As a proxy, perhaps. A public conduit that allowed him to receive information through an official channel while concealing the depth of his own understanding. Or as something more subtle. A test of the conversations happening around him, a calibration mechanism, a second set of ears whose fluency he could verify and therefore trust. Or he was using her as a screen, a beautiful, professional, entirely plausible screen behind which a man who understood everything sat listening to things people were saying in the belief that he couldn't. She was thinking about this at her desk in the office he'd given her, a small, well-appointed room adjacent to his suite on the 48th floor, with a view of the lake that on clear days was genuinely transcendent, when Nico appeared in her doorway.
"Mr. Ferrante would like you to join him for a working dinner this evening," he said. "Carmine's, 8 o'clock.
A working dinner, she said.
Calabrese family, Nico said, with the same practiced neutrality he used for everything. They're interested in a shipping arrangement. Mr. Ferrante would like you present.
Which languages?
Italian, southern dialect, primarily Calabrese. Mr. Ferrante prefers that you relay even nuances that might be lost in standard translation.
She looked at Nico carefully.
"Tell me something," she said, "if I can. How many interpreters has Mr. Ferrante had before me?" Nico's expression didn't change, but something minute shifted in it, the micro-adjustment of a face that had been trained to reveal nothing, encountering a question it hadn't been instructed to answer. "3," he said, after a pause. "What happened to them?" Another pause, longer this time. "They found other opportunities," he said, which told her precisely nothing and everything. She nodded, and he left, and she sat for a moment looking at the lake, which was doing its October thing, steel blue and restless, whitecaps running toward the shore with the relentless purpose of things that had no choice but to keep moving. Carmine's was an institution on the near North Side, the kind of restaurant that didn't need a Yelp page because the people who ate there have been eating there for 40 years, and their children ate there, and their children's children would eat there. Not because the food was necessarily transcendent, though it was very good, but because this was one of those places where a table meant something beyond mere dining. It was a place for conversations that needed walls, and waiters who knew not to linger, and wine lists that arrived without prices because the people ordering from them never asked. She arrived at 8:05 to find Luca already there with the Calabrese party. A man in his 60s with white hair and the broad, sun-darkened face of someone who had grown up in actual Calabria before finding his way to Chicago, accompanied by two younger men who had the specific contained energy of people whose job was to pay attention to things so their employer didn't have to. The older man, introduced as Don Enzo Mancuso, spoke almost exclusively in the dense, vowel-shifted dialect of the Calabrian interior, a form of Italian that bore only passing resemblance to the clean Florentine standard of textbooks. Valentina had learnt it from her grandfather, who had been born in a village 2 hours from Reggio, and she slipped into it with the ease of returning to a room you grew up in. She watched Luca watch her as she did this. Not obviously, not the way a man stares, the way a man observes, with the peripheral attention of someone who is primarily focused on something else, but who is cataloguing a secondary subject with considerable interest. His eyes moved between her and Don Enzo, with an expression she was beginning to be able to read, though reading it made her simultaneously more and less comfortable. He was impressed. He was trying not to be. The dinner was 3 hours long and consisted of a great deal of food, a great deal of wine, and a conversation about shipping routes between Calabria, Naples, and several American ports that Valentina relayed with perfect professionalism, while tracking the undercurrents with the particular alertness of someone who has begun, however against their better judgment, to care what the undercurrents mean. "Certe merci," Don Enzo said at one point, gesturing toward Luca with the comfortable authority of a man who believed he was speaking in a code the woman across the table couldn't access. Certain goods, the kind that don't appear on manifests. Valentina translated this. Luca's eyes moved to her face as she did, just for a moment, a question in them, or not a question. A confirmation of what he'd suspected, that she was translating everything as instructed, including the parts that told her things that the non-disclosure clause existed precisely to contain. "Tell Don Enzo," Luca said in English, "that I appreciate his candor, and that I value partners who speak plainly." She translated. Don Enzo laughed, a big, warm, southern laugh that belonged in a kitchen rather than a restaurant, and reached across the table to clasp Luca's hand with both of his. On the way out, in the brief privacy of the restaurant's coat-check alcove, while their drivers brought the cars around, Luca said to her quietly, in Italian, "You translated the part about the manifests. You told me to relay everything." Most people would have found a euphemism. "I'm not most people," she said. He looked at her with that expression, the one she couldn't fully decode, the one that lived in the territory between appreciation and something more guarded and much more intense. His coat was over one arm. The coat-check alcove was small. The ambient noise of the restaurant covered them like a privacy screen. "No," he said, "you're not." Then his car arrived, and he left, and she stood in the alcove for a moment, with her coat half on, and the distinct, somewhat alarming sensation that she was descending into something, that the ground beneath her professional feet was not as level as it had appeared, and that the man she was descending toward was not going to reach out a hand to stop her. He was, she was beginning to suspect, the reason for the descent. That night, at her kitchen counter with her cereal and her laptop and the quiet of her apartment, she opened a new browser tab and typed Luca Ferrante, Chicago. The results were sparse and careful. A few business registrations, a mention in a Forbes piece about Chicago's new generation of global logistics operators, a photograph from a charity gala 3 years ago in which he stood at the edge of the frame in a tuxedo, looking at something outside the camera's range with the particular quality of attention that she now recognized. She clicked on the photograph and enlarged it. He was looking at something, or someone. His expression was not the composed blankness of his professional face. It was something rawer, more unguarded, the face of a man who has been caught in an unguarded moment, looking at something he wants. She closed the laptop. She sat for a while in the dark kitchen and listened to the city outside her window, and thought about the kind of trouble that comes not because you fall into it, but because you walk toward it, with your eyes open, one careful step at a time, and call it something else. She thought about the 3 previous interpreters who had found other opportunities. And then she went to bed, which solved none of these problems, but at least gave the night somewhere to put them. The nightclub was called Nero's, and it had no sign. You either knew where it was, the unmarked door on a narrow street in the West Loop, between a restaurant supply warehouse and a building that appeared to house a legitimate accounting firm, and was, based on everything Valentina was slowly learning, almost certainly something else. Or you didn't go there. The velvet rope was metaphorical. The actual barrier was the fact that the men at the door had been instructed to recognize the right faces, and the faces they recognized belonged to a very particular category of person. Nico had told her to wear something appropriate. She had stopped asking what appropriate meant. She wore a dress the color of deep garnet, with a neckline that was architectural rather than provocative, a distinction she had spent some years learning to draw. Her hair was down for the first time in her professional capacity, with Luca Ferrante, falling in dark waves past her shoulders, because Nico had said the occasion was social adjacent, and she had interpreted this correctly to mean that appearing to have a life outside her notepad was strategically useful. The interior of Nero's was all black and amber, low lighting that had been designed with the specific intention of making everyone look like they were being filmed by a very good cinematographer. Booths wrapped in dark leather, tables that were islands in a sea of ambient darkness, a bar that ran the length of one wall and was staffed by people who moved with the choreographed efficiency of ballet dancers. The music was the kind, low, rhythmic, exactly the right volume, that served as a sound environment rather than entertainment. A frequency that made conversation feel private even when you were surrounded by people. The booth in the back was Luca's. She had begun to understand by now that wherever Luca Ferrante was, there was a specific architectural feature of the space that became his. Not through designation exactly, no plaque on the wall, no reserved sign, but through the simple physics of how a room organized itself around a person whose gravity was sufficient. People didn't approach the booth without being invited. The invitation, when it came, arrived through intermediaries. The booth had sightlines to every entrance and the bar and the dance floor and the secondary exit that most people in the room didn't know existed. She knew because she'd spent 2 months noticing where Luca's eyes went when he entered a space. He was already there when she arrived, with Salvatore De Luca and 2 men she hadn't met. One of them was perhaps 40, silver at his temples, with the precise, contained alertness of a former military officer, and the kind of grip, she imagined, that could crack a glass if the occasion demanded. The other was younger, early 30s, with a beautiful face that didn't quite conceal the intelligence behind it, and eyes that moved across the room with the speed and accuracy of something with excellent night vision. Luca stood when she approached. It was the kind of gesture that operated beneath the level of conscious social performance, automatic, ingrained, the etiquette of an older world embedded in the bones of a man who moved through the contemporary one with perfect facility. He didn't make a production of it. He simply rose, a half-degree motion, his eyes finding her. The look lasted longer than it needed to. "Valentina," he said. He'd stopped calling her Ms. Greco, somewhere around week 4, in the same quiet, unannounced way that his other shifts occurred. The occasional use of her first name in Italian, the way he had of directing statements to her specifically, in the precise way, with the precise cadence of someone speaking to a person they've begun to think of as distinct from their professional function. "Mr. Ferrante," she said. The corner of his mouth, that almost movement. "Tonight," he said, "you'll be speaking with Romano Voss. He prefers German. His Russian is excellent, but he uses it to obscure. When he switches to German, pay attention to what he doesn't say." She processed this. "What am I not listening for?" "He represents a consortium with interests in—" He paused, with the precision of someone selecting the exact word from a larger vocabulary. "Certain facilities. He'll speak in terms of investment. Listen for what the investment is protecting." "That's not interpretation," she said. "No," he said. "It's something more useful." The German contact arrived at 10:30, tall, fair-haired, with the kind of impeccable grooming that suggested a man who believed presentation was discipline, and discipline was everything. He greeted Luca in English, moved to German within minutes, and Valentina translated with the precision and completeness that had become her trademark, while also doing what Luca had asked. What the investment was protecting, as it emerged across 90 minutes of conversation translated in real time, a network of what Romano Voss called transit points, facilities strung across the American Midwest, nominally logistics warehouses, which handled, according to the shape of what Voss didn't say, things that moved at night and didn't appear on the manifests Don Enzo Mancuso had referenced 3 weeks ago. She sat with this on the drive home, the city peeling past the tinted windows, her notepad closed on her lap. What moves beneath? She'd been thinking that phrase for weeks now, ever since she'd understood that the ocean she was swimming in had a surface that commerce and conference tables and crystal wine glasses floated on, and underneath, at depths she was only now beginning to sound, something else moved in the dark, older, heavier, more sure of itself. She wasn't naive. She had never been naive. Growing up in Chicago, working for the State Department, spending years in rooms where things were said in languages other people couldn't hear, you didn't emerge from all of that with simplicity intact. She understood the shape of the world she was now working in. She had understood it before she signed the contract, in the way that you understand the shape of a fire before you choose to approach it. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she would find herself wanting to understand it completely. Not just professionally, not just the translation of it, but the whole thing, the architecture and the history and the specific human drama at its center. The specific human drama was the problem, because when she thought about understanding it completely, she kept arriving at Luca Ferrante, which was a conclusion she had been arriving at with increasing frequency and decreasing resistance. And this was the kind of problem that didn't get simpler the longer you looked at it. Her phone buzzed. "You interpreted well tonight." Unknown number. His secondary phone, she'd memorized the last 4 digits weeks ago, involuntarily, the way you memorize the sounds of a house you live in. She looked at the message for a moment. "You already knew everything he said," she typed back. A pause, longer than his usual response time. "I wanted to hear it through you." She set the phone down on the seat beside her and looked out at the lake, which was out there somewhere, beyond the city's light, vast and cold and moving, and thought about the specific quality of danger that arrives not with noise and evident threat, but with quiet and proximity, and the particular warmth of being trusted with things you probably shouldn't know. "I wanted to hear it through you." She did not respond, but she saved the message. November came to Chicago like a creditor who has been patient long enough. The lake turned the color of pewter. The wind came off the water with a personal animosity that Valentina had spent 21 years in this city developing, if not affection for, at least a grudging respect. She wore her heaviest coat and kept her head down on the walk from the car to the building's entrance, and thought, as she did every November, about the Rome she had left at age 7 and barely remembered. Olive trees and yellow light, and the particular quality of an October afternoon in a city that had been beautiful for so many centuries it had stopped noticing. The 48th floor was warm. The view of the lake from the 40th-something stories was, on clear days, genuinely magnificent. She had developed the habit of arriving at her desk 10 minutes early, ostensibly to review her notes, but actually to sit in the particular quality of the morning silence of that office, before the day became its complicated self, and look at the water. She was doing this on a Tuesday in November, when Luca appeared in her doorway. He did this occasionally, appeared in her doorway with the naturalness of someone for whom walls were optional, never sat without being invited, never crossed the threshold without a purpose, but appeared and stood and looked at her with that expression that she had been, over weeks, slowly constructing an interpretation of. "There's a situation," he said. "There's usually a situation," she said. Something in his expression shifted. Not a smile, but the movement of something in the direction of one. She had noticed that his face moved more around her than it did in meetings, in negotiations, in the company of the various men and women who populated the architecture of his world. It was a small and significant thing. "The Marchetti family," he said, "from Naples. They'll be here Thursday. The meeting is complicated." "More complicated than usual?" He came into the room then, 2 steps, which in her small office represented a meaningful proximity, and sat in the chair across from her desk. He sat in chairs the way he entered rooms, with complete ownership, his posture not relaxed but contained, as though he was always at rest in the eye of something. "The Marchettis have been allied with my family for 30 years, he said. "Marco Marchetti died in September. His son Gianluca has taken over. Gianluca is 26. A pause. He is not his father." She waited. "He speaks no English, some French, primarily Neapolitan Italian, the dialect not standard." Luca looked at her with a directness she had come to recognize as his particular form of complete attention. "He will try to establish dominance through language. He'll make statements in the dialect expecting them not to be understood fully, asides, implications. He will underestimate you completely." "They usually do." "I know." Something in his voice had changed, a quality she couldn't name immediately. "I don't want him to have that advantage. I need everything he says relayed to me with full accuracy. Everything. Including the asides, especially the asides." She made a note. "What's the nature of the negotiation?" He was quiet for a moment. The particular quality of his silences had become, over weeks, as legible to her as his words. This one was the silence of a man deciding how much to give. "Territory," he said. "The Marchettis believe the recent changes in the Chicago arrangement," she recognized the phrase from Irina Volkov's aside 6 weeks ago and noted this, "represent an opportunity for renegotiation. They believe incorrectly." "What does the Chicago arrangement involve?" He looked at her, a long, assessing look, the look that measured her the way you measure something before committing to it. "You already know," he said. "I've been inferring." "What have you inferred?" She looked at him steadily. "Distribution networks," she said, "moving things that don't appear on manifests, through facilities that appear to be something else, a network that runs from the ports through the Midwest, arrangements with people in positions of regulatory influence, the senator that Mrs. Volkov mentioned." She paused. "Some of it is the family business, some of it is newer. Something changed in the last 2 years that created the current arrangement, and certain parties feel they were not adequately compensated for their role in that change." The silence was absolute. He sat looking at her with an expression that she had not seen before on his face, something stripped of its professional architecture, something that looked, for the space of 3 or 4 seconds, like the unguarded face of a man who has encountered something he didn't expect and hasn't yet decided how to respond to it. "You should be careful," he said finally, "what you say in this office." "I'm aware." "Valentina." He said her name the Italian way, all 4 syllables equal and round. Val-en-ti-na. The way no one else in her American life ever said it, and the effect of it was absurdly physical. She felt it in her sternum, a small, precise blow. What I'm about to say is not a professional recommendation. She waited. The people you've just described to me, the full shape of what you've inferred, they are not people who tolerate having their business articulated clearly by someone outside their circle. He said it with a controlled evenness that made it more frightening than volume would have. You understand me. I do, and yet you said it. You asked me what I'd inferred. I did. Something moved in his face. Why did you answer honestly? She thought about this. Because lying to you would require more energy than I currently have, she said. And because I think you'd know anyway, which would make the lie worse than useless. Another long silence. Thursday, he said, rising from the chair. 7 in the evening. Dress for dinner. And Valentina. He was at the door. He paused, and she had the sense, which she was learning to pay attention to, that the pause was not accidental. What you know stays in this room. It was always going to, she said. He looked at her one more time. Then he left. She sat at her desk and looked at the lake, grey and vast and restless, and thought about the nature of trust in a world where trust was the most valuable and most dangerous currency in circulation. The Thursday meeting was exactly as Luca had predicted. Gianluca Marchetti was 26 and beautiful in the way of young men who had been told they were beautiful from birth and had organized themselves accordingly. All surface and confidence, and the particular arrogance of someone who had never had his assumptions seriously challenged. He spoke in dense Neapolitan dialect, laced with implications and asides, with the comfortable certainty that the interpreter across the table was catching perhaps 70% of what he said. He was catching 100%. 3 hours into the negotiation, Gianluca said to the man at his right, in the dialect, while Luca was examining a document, "The woman is decorative, but the translation is slow. These northern operations are sloppy. My father would not have done business with people this unprepared." Valentina, without inflection, relayed this to Luca in English. The room went very quiet. Luca looked up from the document. He looked at Valentina, just briefly, and something passed between them that was quick and clean and warm, a thing that had no name in any of the languages she spoke, but that lived in the space between collaboration and something considerably more than that. Then he looked at Gianluca Marchetti and said, in flawless Neapolitan, "Your father was a man of great discernment. He never underestimated his interpreter." The colour that moved across Gianluca Marchetti's face was magnificent. Valentina kept her face still, but under the table, her hand, which had been flat on her notepad, curled slowly into a shape that was almost a fist of something. Not anger, but its more interesting cousin. The kind of feeling that arrives when you realize you are being protected, and that the protection has come from somewhere you hadn't expected, and that the person providing it is watching your face right now with the contained attention of someone who is learning something new about what they want. The rules of their arrangement existed, Valentina came to understand, in a permanent state of revision. What had begun as a professional contract, interpreter, employer, the formal geography of workplace distance, was becoming something else, the way water becomes ice, gradually, then all at once, and with a quality of inevitability that you could see if you watched the temperature carefully enough. He didn't break the rules, he simply moved them. The first rule he moved was the one about separate cars. In December, during a late-running meeting with a family from Palermo that stretched to 11 at night, he walked her to the building's garage personally, not with Nico, not with Marco, but himself. 2 steps behind her through the corridor, and then beside her in the elevator, which was small, and in which the particular quality of his physical presence, the height, the contained energy, the smell of him, which was cedar and something darker, was impossible to ignore. "The car is here," he said, when they reached the garage level. "I know where the car is," she said. "You knew the whole building where the car was," he said. "You've been mapping exits since you started." She looked at him. "That obvious?" "Not to most people," he said. "To me, yes." They stood for a moment in the fluorescent chill of the garage, and she thought about the specific kind of person who notices the way other people map exits, the kind who does it himself. "Why do you notice that?" she said. "Old habit," he said. "New application." He handed her into the car personally, not touching her quite, but present in the narrow margin between her and the door, close enough that she was aware of every inch of the space between them with a precision that was almost uncomfortable. Then he closed the door, and the car moved, and she sat in the back in the dark and breathed. The second rule he moved was the one about professional distance during meals. The working dinners had multiplied through December, twice, 3 times a week, the social architecture of a world where business and dinner and power were inextricably linked. She had stopped being surprised by the restaurants, the guests, the languages. What she had not stopped noticing was the way Luca arranged the seating. She was always to his left, not across the table, as an interpreter's positioning might logically suggest, to his left, close enough that when he spoke to her specifically, turned slightly to relay an instruction or acknowledge her translation, the distance between them was measured in inches rather than table widths. She told herself it was practical. Proximity allowed him to speak quietly, directly to her, without telegraphing his communications to the table. This was true. It was also, she was increasingly certain, not the whole truth. The third rule, the one about their conversations being strictly professional, moved on the evening of December 12th, which had been a brutal day by any measure. A meeting that went sideways, a Russian contact who had arrived already angry, accompanied by a man whose right hand stayed consistently near his jacket in a way that was not about posture. A 3-hour negotiation that left the room feeling like a storm had passed through it, and Valentina sitting afterward at her desk with cold coffee and the particular exhaustion that comes from sustained, high-stakes concentration. Luca appeared in her doorway at 9:15. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." "I live here," he said, which was not, she later discovered, entirely a metaphor. He kept a residence in the tower. He kept residences in several cities, but this one, the 48th floor of Meridian Tower, was the one he returned to. "I was going to leave," she said. "I'm leaving now." "Have dinner first," he said. Not, "Will you have dinner?" Not, "Would you like to?" The exact tone of someone whose requests have been so consistently honoured that the request and answer format has become redundant. And yet not imperious. There was something in it that was simpler than command, something that was, if she was reading it correctly, something that was closer to please than his face would ever permit him to actually say. "I'm tired," she said. "The food will help," he said. They ate in his private dining room on the 48th floor, a room she hadn't been in before, smaller than everything else, with a window that looked north toward the lake, and a table for 4 set perpetually for 2.
The meal had been prepared and left by someone she never saw, covered and warm, Italian in the way of someone who had grown up eating serious food, not restaurant food, but home food, the kind with olive oil and patience. She ate. He ate. The silence was different from the silences of their professional life, less tactical, less charged with negotiation. It was the silence of two people who had been performing all day and had stopped. "You handled Petrov well today," he said. Petrov was the Russian contact. "He was testing the translation," she said. "He said something to his associate that he knew I'd relay to see if I'd editorialize." "Did you?" "I never editorialize." He looked at her. "You editorialize constantly," he said. "You're very good at keeping it out of the translation itself, but your face—" He paused, with the particularity of a man describing something he has looked at closely and often. "Your face editorializes." She set down her fork. "What does my face say?" He considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Today," he said, "when Petrov made the comment about the terms, the one about restructuring the distribution arrangement, your face said, 'He's lying, and he knows you know he's lying, and he's making the offer anyway because he thinks the terms matter more to you than his honesty does.'" She stared at him. "Was I wrong?" he said. "No," she said. "He was also watching your face," Luca said. "He reads people the way we do. When your face didn't change at the word restructuring, he recalibrated." A pause. "It was useful." "You used my face as a tell," she said. "I used what was available," he said. It would have sounded cold, she thought, from almost anyone else. From him, sitting across from her in the small dining room, in the lamplight with the city behind him, it sounded like something considerably more complex than calculation. "What was available," she said. "That's what I am." He looked at her for a moment. His expression was doing that thing, the thing where it was composed on the surface and moving underneath, like the lake in winter. "No," he said, "it's not." He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask him to. They finished the meal in a silence that had changed its character. Less of a truce, more of an acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of two people who were aware of the same thing at the same time and had wordlessly agreed not to name it yet. On her way out, at the elevator, he said her name. She turned. He was standing in the doorway of the dining room with his hands in his pockets and the lamplight behind him, and his face held that unguarded quality she had seen once before. In the photograph from the gala, the photograph of a man looking at something he wanted, with the clear, undefended eyes of someone who hadn't yet learned to hide it. He said nothing, just her name. The Italian 4 syllables. The elevator came. She got in. The doors closed. She looked at the seam of the closed doors for the entirety of the descent. January in Chicago was the kind of month that stripped everything to its essentials. The city became monochromatic, white ground, grey sky, black water. And in that stripped-down winter palette, everything felt more legible, less hidden. The cold peeled away the surface layer of things and left what was underneath exposed to the air. Valentina felt this particularly. She had started, without quite making a decision about it, to study Luca Ferrante the way she studied languages. Linguists call it acquisition, the process of internalizing not just the vocabulary of a language, but its music, its grammar, the logic of its silences.
You learn first the obvious things, the words, the sounds, the patterns of emphasis. Then, gradually, you start to hear the things underneath, the emotional freight that certain syllables carry, the things that particular constructions reveal about the culture that built them, the way a language tells you how its speakers experience the world. She was acquiring him. His vocabulary, the precise, unfussy language of a man who had grown up between Italian and English and had in both a preference for accuracy over eloquence, directness over decoration. He never said more than necessary, every word placed with the deliberation of someone who understood that words in his world had weight. His grammar, the way his sentences were structured around information, never around sentiment, even when sentiment was the actual subject. He was an expert at communicative indirection, saying true things about what he felt by describing what had occurred, never by naming the feeling. The car will be outside at 8 instead of, I want to make sure you arrive safely. The meeting ran long, you should eat something, instead of, I noticed you didn't eat today and it bothered me. His silences. She was becoming, she thought, genuinely excellent at these. The tactical silence that bought him time. The controlled silence of someone containing something large. The silence of someone who wanted to speak and had decided not to. And a new silence, which had appeared in the last several weeks with increasing frequency. The silence of someone in a room with a specific person, when every other kind of business is complete and the silence itself becomes the conversation. She catalogued these with the thoroughness of a doctoral student and the emotional detachment of a woman who was conducting this academic inquiry specifically because genuine emotional engagement with its subject was a complication she could not afford. This was not going particularly well. January 14th. A car to a private airfield outside the city, a flight to New York. His plane, small and quiet, with Nico in the front and 2 security personnel she had come to know by sight, if not name, and the rear cabin which was, at Luca's gesture, for the 2 of them. The Castellano family, he said, as Chicago receded below them and the lake spread vast and white-edged to the horizon. New York branch. They control distribution in the northeast, and they want to expand the arrangement westward. The meeting is dinner. Social first, business after. They'll have translators of their own. Then why do you need me? He looked out the window for a moment. The Castellano matriarch, he said. Leonora. She's 81. She was born in Sicily and lived there until she was 40. Her Italian is Sicilian, deep dialect, 19th century idiom in places. She speaks English, but she thinks in Sicilian, and she makes the decisions, not her sons, regardless of what the meeting arrangement suggests. He paused. Her sons don't know I understand Sicilian. I'd like to keep it that way. You speak Sicilian, she said. I understand it. I don't speak it naturally enough to not reveal my understanding. He looked at her. You'll sit beside me at dinner, near Leonora. If she says anything in the dialect to her sons or her attendant, anything, you'll relay it to me. Without appearing to. Without appearing to. She nodded. She had been doing variations of this for months now. The strategic invisibility that was simultaneously her professional tool, and she was beginning to feel a mirror of something personal. She had grown adept at being present without announcing herself, at receiving without revealing, at the peculiar intimacy of someone who is given access to what is most private and most dangerous in a world, while remaining technically on its surface. The Castellano dinner was held in a townhouse on East 64th Street that had been in the family for 4 decades and showed it.
not in disrepair, but in depth. The layered opulence of a house that had been continuously inhabited and continuously loved, with oil paintings that were genuinely old and furniture that had been sat on by several generations of people making consequential decisions. Leonora Castellano was small, white-haired, dressed in black, with a diamond brooch at her collar that was probably worth more than the building, and possessed of the specific, undiluted authority of a woman who had outlived everyone who ever tried to minimize her. She looked at Valentina when Luca introduced her, one long, thorough look, and said nothing. Her sons were present, Enzo and Raffaele, both 60s, both clearly powerful in the derivative way of men who have inherited power rather than forged it, both deferring to their mother with a completeness that was almost filial reverence. The dinner was remarkable. The food was Sicilian in the serious, original way. Arancini with porcini, pasta con le sarde, a lamb preparation that had clearly been made from a recipe so old it didn't have a name. Valentina ate it with the private joy of someone encountering a language they haven't used in a while and finding it still lives in their muscles. Halfway through the second course, Leonora leaned to her attendant, a young Sicilian woman who served as aide and confidant, and said quietly in the dialect, "This one is sharper than his others. Look at her eyes. She hears everything." Valentina's face gave nothing. She forked a piece of lamb. She let 3 beats pass. Then, under cover of reaching for her water glass, she said to Luca, barely above breath, "She says I hear everything." The smallest possible movement in Luca's jaw, a fractional acknowledgement. 2 minutes later, Leonora said to her son Raffaele, "Ask him about the Milan connection, the one they moved last spring. I want to know if what we heard from the Espositos is accurate." Valentina relayed this. Luca's hand, which had been resting on the table, moved fractionally toward hers before he redirected it to his wine glass. She felt the movement, the beginning of something and its correction, with the precision of someone who had learned to read the language of gesture with the same attention they gave to speech. After dinner, in the brief, private moment of coats and departure, Leonora Castellano stopped in front of Valentina. She looked at her for a long moment. Up close she was remarkable. Those eyes, dark and clear, the eyes of a person who had built her entire understanding of the world on accurate observation, and was rarely, if ever, surprised by what she saw. She said, in the Sicilian dialect, "You love him already. Be careful with that." Then she walked to her car with her sons and was gone. And Valentina stood on the cold pavement of East 64th Street in January, with the wind off the East River finding every gap in her coat, and the old woman's words, which she had not translated for anyone, settling into her like stones into deep water. You love him already. Be careful with that. She had the conversation with herself that she knew was coming, the one where she laid out, systematically, all the reasons why the feeling that had been growing since November, since the dinner in the small dining room with the lamplight, since the moment he had said her name at the elevator, was inadvisable, impractical, professionally suicidal, and personally dangerous in ways that went considerably beyond the professional. She had the conversation. She made all the arguments. Then she got in the car with him and said nothing, and he said nothing, and the city rolled past outside, and somewhere over New Jersey he fell asleep in his seat, and she looked at his face, unguarded, still,
the face of someone who trusted the space he was in enough to lose consciousness in it, and thought, yes, already. Then she looked out the window at the dark. The complication had a name. His name was Adrian Voss, not related to the German contact Romano, which was one of the first things she verified, and he arrived at Meridian Tower in late January with a briefcase and a smile and the particular kind of easy, practiced charm that is as different from Luca Ferrante's quality of attention as candlelight is from the sun. Adrian was Luca's attorney. American-born, Harvard law, an accent that moved between New York and Europe with the facility of someone who had strategically cultivated its ambiguity. He was 37, handsome in the specific way of men who have always known they were handsome and have organized their entire social architecture around this knowledge, and he spoke 3 languages, all of them less fluently than he believed. He appeared in Valentina's doorway on a Wednesday morning while Luca was in a meeting and leaned against the frame with the body language of someone who had decided, in advance and without consultation, that the 2 of them were going to get along. "So you're the interpreter," he said. "I am," she said. "Luca's been keeping you a secret," he said. "I've been on 3 deals with him this month, and he hasn't mentioned you once." "Interpreters aren't usually the subject of board meeting conversation," she said. He smiled. It was a good smile, technically excellent, practiced until it appeared spontaneous. "He talks about everything that matters to him," Adrian said, "usually extensively. His not talking about you is the most interesting thing I've heard this month." She looked at him for a moment. "Did you have a professional reason for stopping by, Mr. Voss, or was this social?" "Both, potentially." He straightened. "There's a meeting Thursday with the Ricci family, New Jersey. He'll want you present. I thought I'd introduce myself in advance, so we're not strangers at the table." "We can be strangers at the table," she said pleasantly. "It doesn't affect my work." He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, which surprised her. The self-aware laugh of a man who appreciated being handled with precision. "He said you were sharp," Adrian said. She didn't tell him this was the first suggestion she had that Luca discussed her at all. "Thursday," she said. "I'll be there." The Thursday meeting came and went with the usual precision. The Ricci family, a New Jersey operation with old family ties in the Campania region, came, negotiated, made a set of agreements that she translated perfectly, and left. Adrian sat at the table and made his legal contributions, and watched her work with an attentiveness that was, she noted, observational rather than predatory. More professional curiosity than anything else, though the professional curiosity was wrapped in a social warmth that was clearly habitual. After the meeting, as the room was clearing, she became aware of Luca behind her. She was gathering her notes. She hadn't heard him approach, she rarely did, but she felt the quality of the air change the way it always did when he was within a certain proximity. She looked up. He was watching Adrian, who was across the room speaking with Nico. His expression was its professional self, closed, composed, perfectly managed. But she had learned to read the very small things, and what she saw in his jaw, in the set of his shoulders, in the particular stillness of a man who is very carefully not reacting, was something she had not seen before. She filed it, carefully, without naming it. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian's presence in Luca's orbit increased.
He was a peripheral part of several meetings. He appeared at Carmene's twice during working dinners, invited by Nico on Luca's ostensible instructions. He made a point of speaking to Valentina each time. Easy, smart, genuinely pleasant conversation that she found herself enjoying despite her best professional intentions.
Because Adrian Voss was charming in the uncomplicated way of people who have never had to be cautious about what they said. And this was a quality she found restful after months in rooms where every word was a chess piece. He asked her to dinner on a Friday in February. Not a working dinner. He was explicit about this. The distinction, offered with a clear-eyed directness she found disarming, between professional overlap and personal interest. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said. "It's an excellent idea," he said. "You've been inside a very specific world for 4 months, and from what I can observe, you have almost no life outside of it. Dinner. No business. No translation required." She thought about this for a day. Then she said yes. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way Luca had watched her speak to Adrian across the width of the conference room on Thursday, with that quality of careful stillness that she had catalogued and filed, and was, at this point, finding difficult to interpret as anything other than what it apparently was. She told herself this. She went to dinner with Adrian. It was a perfectly pleasant dinner. Good food, good conversation, genuine laughter at several points, the uncomplicated social ease of two smart people with enough in common to sustain 3 hours of talk. Adrian was interesting. He had a history, born to an immigrant family, built his career through effort rather than inheritance, that she respected. He was perceptive and honest, and he looked at her with transparent interest that was entirely free of calculation. She arrived home having enjoyed herself and feeling slightly guilty about it, which she thought said something about the state of her inner life. Her phone buzzed at 11:15, Luca's secondary number. The Bracco contact has moved the Thursday meeting to Wednesday, 8 a.m. She looked at the text. At 11:15 on a Friday night, she was receiving a meeting update that could have waited until Monday morning or been relayed through Nico. She looked at the text and the timestamp and thought about all the things that weren't being said. "Understood," she typed back. "I'll be ready." A long pause, longer than a meeting confirmation required. "How was dinner?" 3 words. No question mark. Not, strictly speaking, a question. A statement with the structure of one. She sat with her coat still on, keys in her hand, standing in her own kitchen, and looked at the text. He knew. Of course he knew. There was very little that happened in the professional and social world adjacent to Luca Ferrante that he didn't know. And Adrian was his own attorney, and she was, what? His interpreter? His employee? The woman in the left-hand seat at every dinner table? The woman whose face he read like a secondary instrument when the room got complicated? She typed. It was professional development. Interpreters need social practice. Another pause. Longer. Is that what it was? She set her phone on the counter and went to change out of her coat. When she came back, there was one more message. Wednesday. Don't be late. She sat down at her kitchen counter and laughed, a small, private laugh at the ceiling, at the universe, at the complete and utter impossibility of the situation she was constructing for herself. Then she texted back, "I've never been late." And she went to bed, and she thought about his face at the table, watching her from across the room, and she thought about the old Sicilian woman's voice on a cold New York pavement. "You love him already." She was beginning, despite every professional and personal argument against it, to think the old woman was right. She was not late. She arrived at Meridian Tower at 7:50, nodded at the security desk, took the elevator to the 48th floor, and was in her office with coffee and her notes by 7:58. At 8:02, Luca opened her door. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, and also differently. She was tuned finely enough now to perceive both things simultaneously. The surface was the same, composed, contained, the professional precision of a man whose face had been trained to give nothing away. Underneath that, in the quality of his stillness, in the particular set of his jaw, something was running at a higher temperature than usual. "The Braco meeting has been postponed," he said. She looked at him. "Postponed?" "Until Friday." She let the silence sit for a moment. "So there's no meeting today?" "No." He came into the office, stood by the window, looked at the lake, which today was iron-grey and motionless in the morning cold. "I wanted to speak with you about the arrangement going forward." She set her coffee down. "The arrangement?" He turned from the window, looked at her directly. The full force of it, not the sidelong monitoring of meetings, but the complete, undivided attention of a man who had decided to stop managing what she could see. "Adrian Voss," he said. "Is a professional contact," she said. "He took you to dinner," Luca said. "Yes," she said. "He did." "I don't want him to do that again," he said. The room went very quiet. She looked at him. She thought about her professional responsibilities, her non-disclosure contract, her rent, the number on her monthly payment that represented more than she had ever earned. She thought about all the sensible, practical reasons why she should say something neutral and redirecting and professionally appropriate. "You don't want him to?" she said carefully. "No." "That's not—" She stopped, started again. "Mr. Ferrante, what I do outside of working hours is Valentina." He said her name in that way, flat and direct, and full of exactly what he was trying not to say. "I am aware of what your personal time is your own. I am telling you what I want. I am not telling you what to do." She looked at him for a long time. "Why?" she said. He was quiet. The lake was out there, vast and grey, and the 48th floor held its altitude above the city, and the silence expanded between them like a third entity in the room, taking up space, demanding acknowledgement. "You know why," he said. "I'd like to hear it," she said. His jaw tightened fractionally. He looked at the lake again. When he looked back at her, something in his face had changed. The professional architecture slightly displaced, the structure that kept things contained slightly open at one point, the way a room admits light when a door is not fully shut. "I have been—" He paused with the precision of a man for whom precision is primary, even when it costs him something. "Aware of you. In a way that is not strictly professional. For some time." "How long?" she said. "A beat." "Since the first meeting," he said, "when you translated the manifest comment from Don Enzo." She stared at him. "That was November." "October," he said. "It was October." "You've been aware of me since October." "Yes. And you're telling me this now." I'm telling you this now because you had dinner with Adrian and I found that I was—" Another precise pause, and she could see the effort of it, the specific cost to a man who was accustomed to controlling his language completely. Considerably less rational about it than I would have expected. She looked at him. He looked at her. This was, she understood, the most he had offered anyone in a very long time. She understood this not because he had told her, but because she had been reading him for months, acquiring him with the thoroughness of a linguist encountering a language they had decided to learn completely. And she knew the grammar of his emotional life well enough to know that this, standing here, offering this, was an enormous act of something for him. Not vulnerability, precisely, something more dignified than vulnerability. Honesty, at considerable personal cost. "Luca," she said. He looked at her when she used his first name, a small, precise thing, the quality of his attention sharpening. "This is—" She stopped, took a breath. "You have to understand what this is, what I know, what I translate every day, the world you live in." "I understand what my world is," he said. "I'm not sure you understand what it means for me to be in it," she said. "I have spent 4 months understanding things I can never understand. I know the shape of this," she gestured, a small, precise gesture that encompassed everything she wasn't naming. All of it. "And I'm still here. I'm still coming to work. I'm still translating things that—" She stopped again. "I'm not neutral about you either," she said. "I want to be clear about that. But I need you to know that I'm not here because I don't know what this is. I'm here because I know exactly what it is, and I've made the choice to be here anyway. And that has to mean something." He looked at her for the length of one slow breath. "It means everything," he said. Then he crossed the room, and his hand, large and warm and steady, came up to her face, not quite touching, hovering at the edge of her cheek, with the restraint of someone who has been holding something back for months and is managing its release with great care. "Can I—" he began. "Yes," she said, before he finished. He kissed her. It was not— She had time to note this, with the analytical part of her that never entirely stopped noting things. The kiss of someone who was uncertain. It was quiet and complete and very still, the way important things are when they finally happen. And it tasted like the specific gravity of something that had been in progress for a long time before it declared itself. When he pulled back, she opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an expression she had no name for in any language she had ever learned. Something that was not happiness exactly, which was too simple, too uncomplicated, too available. Something more like the expression of a man who has been standing in front of a locked door for a very long time and has just heard the sound of a key. "Wednesday," he said. "You came in early." "I've never been late," she said. The corner of his mouth, the almost smile, the thing she had wanted to make real for months. It was real. There was a version of this, Valentina understood, that ended neatly. In the version, she and Luca had their conversation in her office, made their admission, adjusted the architecture of their professional relationship accordingly, and navigated the overlap of personal and professional with the careful maturity of 2 intelligent adults who understood the situation they were in. She understood that version entirely. She was living a different one. What changed between them after Wednesday was not visible to the outside world. In meetings, in negotiations, in the rooms full of people who were powerful and careful and aware of everything, they were what they had always been. the meticulous interpreter and her employer, positioned at the precise angle of professional proximity, communicating through the machinery of their work. The translation continued. The dinners continued. The careful management of external appearance continued. What changed was the quality of everything underneath. She was now fluent in him. The language she had been acquiring for months was complete. Not complete in the way of a finished dictionary, but complete in the way of true fluency, when you stop translating and start thinking in the language itself. She knew his silences. She knew the difference between the silence of calculation and the silence of feeling. She knew the three distinct ways his attention sharpened, and what each of them was responding to, and which one was for her specifically. The penthouse. He had the 48th floor, the executive suite that was ostensibly his office, and above that, the 49th and 50th, which no one in the building accessed without specific permission, and which were, she discovered, his actual life. He showed it to her on the 3rd Friday of February. They had come up together from the garage after a late dinner, alone for the first time, without Nico, without the security shadow that was usually present, and at the 48th floor she had expected him to take her to her office for whatever it was they needed to discuss. Instead, he pressed the button for 49. The elevator opened onto a hall that was not the corridor of an office building. Wide-planked dark wood floor. A single painting on the wall. Enormous, abstract, with the depth and turbulence of a storm seen from above. A door at the end of the hall that opened into the first space she had entered in months that felt genuinely inhabited by someone rather than designed to project their authority. Books. An extraordinary number of books, organized with the logic of someone who used them regularly rather than displayed them. Spines well worn, post-it flags throughout, stacks on the floor beside the chairs. A kitchen that was clearly used. A long sofa, the colour of dark wool, facing the window that ran the full length of the north wall, looking out at the lake in winter, which at this hour and altitude was an expanse of darkness, with the lights of the far shore an illuminated suggestion on its edge. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He made coffee. She watched him do it with the particular attention she brought to everything about him now, the economic, unhurried movements of someone entirely comfortable in his own space, pouring water, finding cups, the small domestic grace of it, entirely at odds with, and entirely consistent with, the controlled authority of the man she observed in every professional context. He brought 2 cups, sat beside her on the sofa, not across from her, beside her, with the natural ease of a proximity that had been earned, and they looked at the lake together. "Tell me something," she said. "Anything." "Your family," she said. "The actual family, the Ferrante family." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the lake was out there, dark and enormous. "My grandfather came from Lombardy," he said. "He built a business, transportation initially, legitimate entirely. He was successful. He made connections. The connections led over time to other kinds of business. By the time my father inherited, the 2 kinds of business were inseparable." He sipped his coffee. "I inherited both." "You could have separated them," she said. "Could I?" he said. Not a question, not agreement. The exact tone of someone who has considered a thing long enough to know its full complexity. "What would it cost?" she said. "Everything," he said simply. "And not only for me. There are 240 people in my direct employ, 3 times that in the subsidiary operations. The legitimate side and the other side share infrastructure, personnel, relationships that cannot be cleanly divided. Removing one would, he paused, destabilize the entire structure. Including the people who depend on it, she said. Including them. She looked at him. You've justified it before, she said, to yourself. Many times. And it still works? He turned his head and looked at her. Some days, he said. The honesty of it hit her with the particular force of something unexpected. She had built a careful internal image of him, the dangerous, powerful, controlled man who operated in a world she was choosing to inhabit despite everything she knew about it. And the man on the sofa, coffee cup in hand, talking about the days when his own justifications were sufficient, was the same person and more completely himself. She put her hand on his. He looked at it. Then he turned his hand over and held it with the contained, careful grip of someone handling something that matters. They sat like that for a long time. She asked him later about the languages. My mother was Russian, he said. She spoke to me only in Russian until I was 7. After she left, a pause that told her this was where the story had its weight. I kept it. It felt like keeping her. And the Mandarin? Business, he said. 5 years ago I spent significant time in Shanghai. I learned it because I needed to, and I kept it because... He paused again, with the slight frown of someone examining their own motives. Because I was alone there most of the time, and learning something was better than the alternative. What was the alternative? Myself, he said. She turned and looked at him, and he was already looking at her with that expression, the one that had no name in any language, the one that existed only in his face and only in proximity to her. She thought about Leonora Castellano's voice in the cold New York air. Be careful with that. She thought about what careful meant when you were already here, already past careful, already so far in the water that the shore had become theoretical. She leaned toward him, and he, carefully, completely, with the full attention of someone who did nothing by half, leaned toward her. February became March. The city thawed incrementally, by degrees, the way feeling returns to a limb that has been cold for a long time. First a deep, almost painful awareness, then warmth, then the gradual return of full sensation. The lake changed colour. Valentina walked to the building each morning through air that was still cold but had lost its malice. And she thought about the specific quality of happiness that arrives when you have stopped trying to protect yourself from something and simply allowed it to be. She was aware, with the clarity of a person who has not abandoned her intelligence in favour of her feelings, but is attempting to operate both simultaneously, that the thing she was in was dangerous. Not abstractly dangerous, in the way of all complicated personal entanglements, but specifically, materially dangerous, in the way of a world with real consequences and real people who would use real force to protect real interests. She was also aware that she had been in it for months, that the decision to stay, the decision to understand, had been made and remade every single day since the first morning she had walked into that frosted glass office and signed her name. The knowledge she carried was enormous. In 4 months of interpreting, translating, receiving, accumulating, she had built a map of Luca Ferrante's world that was more complete and more detailed than the maps carried by most of the people who operated inside it. She knew the names of the families, the structures of the alliances, the locations of the facilities, the identities of the regulatory contacts. She knew the Chicago arrangement, the New York arrangement, the threads that connected both to European operations through the Volkov and Marchetti families. She also knew, and this was the knowledge that sat heaviest, the name of the senator. She had heard it in 3 separate conversations by now, always in Russian or Sicilian or heavy Italian dialect, always in the context of the other matter that Irina Volkov had referenced in the first meeting. A sitting United States senator whose cooperation with certain regulatory reviews had been, in the vocabulary of these conversations, arranged and maintained, and in one conversation she had translated for Luca alone and in full, at some cost to everyone involved. She had not reported this. She would not report it. The non-disclosure clauses of her contract were one consideration. The reality of her situation was a more powerful one. She was in this world now. She had entered with open eyes, and she was staying with them open. And the choice to stay was the choice that made all the other choices. She told Luca this directly, on a Sunday morning in the penthouse, with the early spring light coming off the lake. They were in the kitchen. He cooked on Sundays, which was one of the many private facts about Luca Ferrante that were entirely inconsistent with, and entirely consistent with, his public self. And she was sitting on the kitchen counter watching him make eggs in the specific, methodical way he brought to everything. "I know everything," she said. He didn't look up from the pan. "I know you do." "I've known it for months." "I know that too." "And she paused, "you're not concerned." He looked up at her then. The morning light was on his face. Good light, honest light, the kind that showed everything. "I was," he said. "When you walked into my office in October, I had every intention of limiting your access. Standard practice. The interpreter hears what they need to hear and nothing more." He turned back to the pan. "You were too good," he said. "You heard everything anyway. And once you had," a pause, "the decision about what to do with that became more complex." "You could have let me go," she said. "I could have," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to." "That's not a security rationale," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at him. This man, in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, in a dark sweater and bare feet, cooking eggs with the precision he brought to everything. This man who moved through a dangerous world with the particular assurance of someone who had built it himself and was entirely responsible for its consequences. This man who had kissed her in her office and showed her his books and told her his mother was Russian and that learning Mandarin alone in Shanghai had been better than the alternative of himself. "Luca," she said. He looked at her. "If something happened, to this, to all of it, what would I be?" He set the spatula down. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her where she sat on the counter, which put them at the same level, eye to eye for once, instead of the slight difference that his height usually created. He looked at her face with the full, undivided attention that was his particular gift and his particular weapon. "You would be mine," he said, "in every arrangement, and none of them. The simplicity of it disarmed her completely. She had expected qualification, the careful legal language of a man whose entire life was structured around managing exposure. Instead, he had given her something without hedging, without the apparatus of protection, and the rawness of it was the most frightening thing he had yet done. "That's an enormous claim," she said. "Yes," he said, "you're not a man who makes enormous claims lightly." "No," he said. She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. He kissed her, brief, exact, the specific punctuation of something being decided. Then he went back to the eggs, and she sat on the counter and looked at the lake and thought about what it meant to be someone's in a world where the word meant what it meant in his world, completely, irrevocably, with all the weight of that world behind it. She thought about the senator's name. She thought about the 3 interpreters who had found other opportunities. She thought about Sunday morning light and the specific honesty of a man who had told her the truth about his world without being asked, in the only language they had, the language of what was said and what was not said, and all the enormous territory in between. She ate her eggs. The day was very clear. The Volkov situation escalated in March. Irina Volkov returned from Vladivostok in the company of a man Valentina had not seen before, introduced as Dmitry Volkov, Irina's nephew, who was approximately 35, with an ex-military bearing and the specific, flat quality in his eyes of someone who had done things that required compartmentalization. He spoke Russian exclusively in meetings and English in hallways, which Valentina noted without comment. The meeting was conducted with the surface pleasantness of all their negotiations, the crystal and the wine, and the careful social architecture of people who were, in their professional capacity, civilized. Underneath, she felt a change in the current. Something was different about the Volkov posture. Irina, who had always been controlled and strategic, was controlled in a different key now. Something tighter. Something that reminded Valentina of the way a rune feels before weather. Dmitry Volkov spoke to his aunt at one point during a document review, quietly, in Russian. He said, "The facility in Gary was found. The inventory has been moved, but the timeline is shortened. Marchetti knows. He's already spoken to the senator's people." Valentina translated this to Luca in the same even tone she used for everything. The change in Luca was invisible to the room and completely legible to her. A micro-adjustment in his posture, a fractional cooling of the warmth, the very controlled, very minimal warmth that had been in his expression during pleasantries. He made a note on the pad in front of him. He did not look at her. After the meeting, when the Volkovs had left and Nico had cleared the room, Luca stood at the window in the configuration she now recognized as his thinking posture. Weight slightly forward, hands clasped, looking at the city below with the compressed attention of someone processing several things simultaneously. "The Gary facility," she said. "I know." Marchetti spoke to the senator. "I know that too." He turned. "This is the complication I've been managing for the past 6 weeks. Gianluca Marchetti is not his father. He doesn't understand the architecture of these arrangements, what holds them together, and what happens when you pull a single thread." "He's pulled a thread," she said. "He's set fire to the whole thing. and gone to stand by the window to watch, Luca said. It was the sharpest thing she had heard from him, the closest to uncontrolled frustration, and it told her the seriousness of the situation more clearly than any measured statement could. "What does this mean for you?" she said. He looked at her. "For me, specifically?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "It means there will be a period of reorganization. Certain arrangements will need to move, to restructure, to be dissolved and rebuilt. It will require attention that I can't fully share." He paused. "I need you to know that during this period, things may appear to change between us." "Appear to," she said carefully. "Appear to," he confirmed, "for reasons of containing exposure." She looked at him. She thought about what containing exposure meant in his vocabulary. It meant protecting something. It meant not being seen by the people who were watching from Vladivostok and Naples and New Jersey, with the specific assessing attention of people whose interests were realigning. "You're going to pull back," she said. "In observable ways only," he said, "professionally, publicly. And privately?" He crossed the room to her, stood in front of her, put his hand against her face in that way he had, the specific, contained touch of someone who was very careful with things that mattered. "Privately," he said, "nothing changes." She held his gaze. "Tell me the truth, Luca." "I am." "Are you protecting me or protecting yourself?" A pause, a long pause, and she felt in it the exact weight of the question, the fair, serious, adult question that she had asked and that deserved an honest answer. "Both," he said, "equally." She thought about this. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated, with a quality in his voice that she had no single word name for in any language. What followed was 3 weeks that were, professionally, the most challenging of her tenure. The Gianluca Marchetti situation expanded. 3 emergency meetings, 2 of which took place in locations she'd never been taken before, a private club on the near north side that made Nero's look brash, a man she was introduced to only by a first name who wore a cardinal's ring and spoke Italian with the accent of the Vatican. She translated all of it, every word, with the complete precision that had become her signature, and filed every piece of it in the internal map she was building. Luca, in these meetings, was correct. His manner toward her, in rooms where it could be observed, was professional and nothing more. The specific quality of his attention was professionally distributed, not directed at her alone. When she met his eyes, she received the controlled, neutral gaze of an employer. Only once, in the first week of this period, did the professional surface give way for a moment. She had translated something, a statement from the cardinal ringman about the vulnerability of certain positions, that had a specific personal implication for Luca that she saw register in his face in a way the room couldn't see, but she could. She continued translating. She kept his face. Afterward, in the private elevator, alone for 20 seconds between the lobby and the parking garage, his hand found hers in the dark of the elevator cabin. For 20 seconds. Then the doors opened. She walked to the car and got in and sat in the dark and pressed her palm against the seat where his hand had been, and thought about what it meant to carry a secret that large, in the most professional version of your face, every day, in a room where everyone was watching. She thought, this is what he does. Every room, every day. she thought. No wonder he was drawn to someone who understood what wasn't being said. Her name was Luca Ferrante, and she arrived in Chicago in the first week of April without announcement, which was, as Nico explained to Valentina, with the careful neutrality of someone relaying information about a weather event, how Sophia generally arrived everywhere. She was 29, 3 years younger than Valentina, and the resemblance to Luca was structural. The same dark hair, the same deep-water eyes, the same quality of contained attention, but translated into an entirely different register. Where Luca was winter, Sophia was weather. Everything about her moved, her hands when she spoke, her eyes, which went everywhere in a room and returned to the most interesting point with the precision of a compass finding north. Her manner, which was warm and direct and entirely without the careful management that characterized her brothers. She appeared in Valentina's office doorway at 11 on a Tuesday morning and said in Italian without preamble, "You're the interpreter." "I am," Valentina said. "Luca speaks of you very highly," Sophia said. She came into the office and sat, without invitation, with the natural ease of someone for whom rooms were immediately their own, and looked at Valentina with open, unapologetic assessment. "Which, for Luca, means he's mentioned you at all." Valentina looked at her. "He hasn't mentioned you." "Oh, he never mentions me," Sophia said cheerfully. "I'm the part of his life he's protecting. He thinks I don't know that." She paused. "I know everything." "That seems to be a quality of the Ferrante circle," Valentina said. Sophia laughed, full, unself-conscious, the laugh of someone who had decided early in life that amusement was available in most situations, and had been right. She crossed her ankles and looked at Valentina with the clear-eyed warmth of someone who had already decided to like her and was now confirming the decision. "Tell me something," Sophia said. "If I can. Do you love my brother?" The directness of it was extraordinary. Valentina sat for a moment in the full force of the question. "I don't think," she said carefully, "that's a question I should answer to his sister before I've answered it to him." Sophia smiled. It was her brother's smile, the real version of it, not the professional almost movement, but the full thing which transformed the face. "That's the right answer," she said. He would say the exact same thing. The family precision with words. My God, it's like being raised by the dictionary. She stayed for 3 hours. Over those 3 hours, Valentina constructed an understanding of Luca Ferrante that was simultaneously comforting and complicated. She was brilliant, genuinely, quietly brilliant, with degrees in economics and art history that she deployed with equal ease. She lived in Geneva and had, she indicated with the same easy candour she brought to everything, essentially no contact with the operational side of the family business. "That was always Luca's arrangement," she said. "He insisted. He kept me clean." She said this with a quality that was not quite bitterness, more the complex feeling of someone who is grateful for protection and mourns the distance it creates simultaneously. "He carries it for everyone," Valentina said. Sophia looked at her with sudden sharpness. "Yes," she said, "he does. Did he tell you that?" "He told me enough," Valentina said. "He told you a great deal," Sophia said, which was not a statement about information. Luca doesn't tell people things. He presents them with selected facts and manages the perimeter carefully. The fact that you know what you just demonstrated means he's done the opposite with you. She paused. "That's new," she said. "That's very new." Luca appeared at the office door at 2 o'clock with the expression of a man who has discovered that two significant parts of his world have been in conversation for 3 hours without his knowledge or supervision. He looked at his sister and then at Valentina with the careful, assessing look of someone taking inventory. "Sophia," he said. "You look tired," Sophia said pleasantly. "Valentina and I have been having a very useful conversation." "I imagine you have," he said. "She hasn't told me anything I shouldn't know," Sophia said, rising. "She's very good, Luca. Better than good." She kissed him on both cheeks. He received this with the brief, controlled warmth of someone unaccustomed to being kissed and not unwilling, and then paused at the door. She looked at Valentina. "Geneva," she said, "you should come sometime. The conference interpreting work is extraordinary, and the city is beautiful." "Is that an invitation?" Valentina said. "It's whatever it needs to be," Sophia said, which was exactly something Luca would have said, and apparently something the Ferrante genetic material encoded for, along with the dark hair and the quality of attention. After she left, Luca stood in the doorway. "What did she tell you?" he said. "About you?" "About anything." Valentina looked at him. "She told me you kept her clean," she said. "At personal cost. That you carry the weight for people who don't know it's being carried." She paused. "She told me that's new, what you've done with me, that you've never been like this, with anyone, inside the work." He was very still. "She shouldn't have told you that," he said. "Probably not," Valentina said. "Are you angry?" A pause. "No," he said. She looked at him. "She also told me I should come to Geneva." "Should you?" he said. The tone was carefully neutral, professionally managed, but she read underneath it with complete accuracy at this point. "I think I should," she said. "Eventually." He nodded once. Precisely. The nod of a man filing a decision for future implementation. "Eventually," he said. She turned back to her desk, and he went back to his office, and the distance between the two rooms, which was, objectively, about 40 feet of corporate corridor, felt like something else entirely. Something traversable. Something that had already been traversed in the ways that mattered. The name came on a Thursday. Valentina was alone in her office when Nico appeared with a folder, physical, which was unusual. Most of their communications were encrypted digital, and set it on her desk with the expression of someone delivering news that sits in the ambiguous territory between significant and dangerous. "Mr. Ferrante needs you to review this before the 4 o'clock, he said. Inside the folder, documents in Russian, legal in structure, specific in content. A series of contracts dated from the previous year between a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands and a logistics firm based in Vladivostok, which he recognized as a Volkov entity. The contracts described the operation of several storage facilities in the American Midwest, Gary, Indiana, Joliet, Illinois, Hammond, in terms that were clean enough on their surface to survive casual scrutiny and specific enough in their structure to mean something else entirely to someone who knew what they were looking at. And in the signatory block of one of the contracts, alongside the corporate entities and the offshore holding company, was a personal guarantee. The name on the personal guarantee was Senator David Hargrove. She sat with this for a long moment. She had known the senator's name for weeks, had inferred it, assembled it from context, heard it twice in conversation, translated for Luca alone. But seeing it in writing, in a legal document with dates and amounts, was different from knowing. This was not a conversation that could be disavowed. This was paper. She translated the documents, all of them, with the same precision she brought to everything, the same complete and unelaborated accuracy, including the guarantees and the amounts and the date of the most recent amendment, which was 6 weeks ago. When she brought the translation to Luca at 3:50, he read it without reaction. He had the ability, which she found simultaneously admirable and unnerving, to receive information with his face in a complete neutral state, processing without broadcasting. "The personal guarantee," he said. "Yes. This will be used." "To do what?" she said. He looked up at her. "Hargrove has been reconsidering his arrangement with the Volkovs. Under pressure, the Gary facility situation created exposure that he finds uncomfortable. His people have been communicating with certain federal contacts." He said federal contacts with the specific evenness of someone managing their reaction to a very large threat. "This," he tapped the document, "creates leverage that persuades him that reconsidering is not in his interest." She looked at him. "You're going to use a document that implicates a sitting senator in federal crimes to coerce his continued compliance with—" She stopped. "Yes," he said. "I know what it is," he said. There was something in his voice, not guilt exactly, the acknowledgement of the weight of things, the specific heaviness of someone who knows the cost of what they're doing and has decided to do it anyway. It is what it is in the world that exists. She thought about the version of this that she had been telling herself, the version where the world she was inside was dangerous and real and serious, but still somehow separate from the part of her that made moral assessments. The two things had been coexisting because she had been careful not to push them against each other. "Valentina," he said. She looked at him. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "Do you? You're thinking about the point at which understanding something and accepting it become the same thing." He said this with the directness of someone who has had this argument with themselves and knows all the positions. "You're thinking about whether staying here constitutes a kind of complicity." "Yes," she said. "I can't answer that for you," he said. "I don't have a clean answer. I have the answer of the world I'm in." He paused. "But I'll tell you this. The senator made his arrangement freely. No one compelled him. The leverage we're applying is the leverage of his own choices." "That's a convenient distinction," she said. "Most distinctions are," he said. "That doesn't make them false." She looked at him for a long time. "I need some air," she said. "Take it," he said. "Come back." The last two words were not quite a request. They were the statement of a man who had been very careful about what he let himself need, and who was now letting her see that she was one of them. She went downstairs. She walked along the river for 40 minutes in the April wind. She thought about her mother and her grandmother, and the piano recital, and the pearls, and all the ways women in her family had navigated rooms full of powerful men without losing themselves entirely. She thought about what losing yourself meant when you had walked in with open eyes. She came back. He was at his desk when she returned. He looked up. He said nothing. "I'm still here," she said. "I know," he said. She sat down at her desk across the hall and opened the next translation assignment and began. April brought warmth, and with warmth, Neros. The club had its own season, More alive in the shoulder months, she discovered, when the city was waking up and the people who populated Luca's world emerged from whatever hibernation the Chicago winter imposed on them, more present, more visible, filling the amber booths and the low-lit tables with the particular energy of people who moved through the world in a way that required both enjoyment and vigilance simultaneously. She went with him on a Saturday night in April, not as his interpreter. That distinction had become academic in certain contexts, though she maintained it professionally because it provided a useful surface, and because she was good at it, and because there was something in her that would always be the linguist first, the person in the room who was most interested in what was being communicated and how. But on a Saturday night at Nero's, the professional pretext was absent, and what remained was simpler and more complicated. He came to her apartment to collect her. This was new. He had sent cars, messages, instructions. He had not come to her apartment before, and when she opened the door and found him standing in her hallway in a dark jacket, without Nico, without a driver, in a manner that was entirely private and entirely his own, she felt the specific quality of a thing that has moved from one territory into another and cannot move back. "You know where I live," she said. "I've always known," he said. "Of course you have." She stood back to let him in. He entered with his characteristic quality of taking ownership of a space without making a show of it, and looked at her apartment, which was, she was suddenly aware, extremely her, in the way of a space inhabited by someone who reads and thinks and has opinions about light. Books everywhere, art that was interesting rather than decorative, a kitchen that was used, the half-eaten cereal on the counter that she had completely failed to address before opening the door. He looked at the cereal with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I eat cereal at night," she said. "It's a thing." "It's a thing," he agreed, as though filing it. At Nero's, they were shown to the back booth as a matter of course. Several people stopped to greet Luca, men she recognized, men she didn't, women in the specific category of decorative and sharp that populated these rooms. He greeted all of them with the contained, perfect social management that was his public mode, and she stood beside him and received introductions and translated nothing because there was nothing to translate, and felt, for the first time, genuinely present in his world as a person rather than a professional function. Then a man she recognized appeared, Gianluca Marchetti, the 26-year-old who had made the comment about decorative interpreters, the one who had started the fire and gone to the window to watch. He was not alone. He had two men with him and a woman who was introduced as his cousin, and he moved through the room with a specific kind of bravado that Valentina recognized as the behavior of someone who is performing confidence they do not entirely feel. He saw Luca from across the room. Something moved in his face. Calculation. And underneath calculation, something younger and less controlled. Then he saw Valentina. She watched him register her, not as the interpreter from the November meeting, but as the woman standing next to Luca Ferrante on a Saturday night in a personal capacity, in a dress the colour of champagne, with her hand briefly on his arm as he greeted someone beside them. Gianluca said something to the man on his right. She was close enough to hear it. Italian, not dialect, standard Italian, almost formally proper, which meant it was meant to be heard. "So the interpreter is also the entertainment. How adaptable. Northern men always have interesting tastes." She felt Luca's arm go still beneath her hand. She had learned to read him like weather. What moved through him in that moment was not the warmth of controlled irritation or even the cold of calculated response. It was something more elemental, the very quiet, very still reaction of a man to something touching what he was protective of. He turned. He looked at Gianluca Marchetti across the room, and then he said something remarkable. He said nothing. He held the younger man's gaze for exactly long enough, 5 seconds, perhaps 6, with the specific quality of a look that contained everything a conversation might convey and none of the words. And Gianluca Marchetti's comfortable bravado developed in those 5 seconds a visible crack. Then Luca turned back to the person he'd been greeting and continued as though nothing had occurred. Gianluca left 30 minutes later. "You didn't say anything to him," she said later in the booth. "I didn't need to," Luca said. "What did the look say?" He considered this. "Enough," he said. "In what language?" He looked at her. The ambient light was amber and low, and his face in it was as familiar to her as a landscape she had been walking for months. Every contour and shadow and particular quality of light known, not catalogued, but lived. "The one that doesn't need translation," he said. She looked at him. "Every language has untranslatable words," she said. "Things that exist in one language and can only be approximated in another. The Portuguese have saudade, the ache for something you've lost or never had. The Germans have Weltschmerz, the sadness of the world. The Italians have abbiocco, the drowsiness after a large meal." She paused. "The language you use when you look at someone like that. I don't know the word for it." "Nor do I," he said. "That's unusual for you," she said. "You always know the word." "Yes," he said, "it is unusual." He reached across the table and took her hand with the complete, unhurried certainty of someone who has decided this is where his hand belongs. In the amber light of Nero's, in the ambient music that was exactly the right volume, in the April night that was the first warm one of the year, she felt the particular quality of something settling, the way a long and complicated sentence finally arrives at its period. She thought, this is the language. This. May arrived, and so did a woman named Agent Rebecca Marsh. Valentina met her entirely by accident, which she would later learn was not an accident at all, in the lobby of the building adjacent to Meridian Tower, which she had started entering through as a matter of habit, the kind of routine variation that a person develops in an environment where unpredictability is a safety behavior. Rebecca Marsh was 40, compact, dressed in the unremarkable professional clothes of someone who had chosen their wardrobe to communicate nothing of note. She had the specific quality of attentiveness that Valentina, by this point, could recognize instantly, the quality of someone whose professional life required them to observe without being observed. "Miss Greco," she said. Valentina stopped. "Yes?" "I wonder if you have 5 minutes." She showed a badge. Federal. Valentina looked at it with the care of someone who had spent months translating communications about the people who carried badges like that. "I'm not here to alarm you," Agent Marsh said. "I'm here because I believe you can help us with an ongoing matter." They sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Agent Marsh was direct and careful in equal measure, the tone of someone who understood the calibration required to speak to a person in Valentina's position and had prepared for it. "We're aware of your employment with Luca Ferrante," she said.
We're aware of the scope of your access. A pause. We're aware that you have substantial knowledge of the operational structure of certain ongoing activities. Valentina said nothing. We're not asking you to betray anyone, Marsh said. We're asking you to confirm certain information that we already have, to verify the accuracy of our existing intelligence. Your confirmation, your expertise as a credentialed interpreter would have significant evidentiary value. Valentina looked at her coffee cup. She thought about the folder with Senator Hargrove's name on the personal guarantee. She thought about the Gary facilities. She thought about the meetings she had translated, the conversations she had relayed, the accumulated architecture of 4 months of knowing. She thought about Luca in the penthouse on a Sunday morning, making eggs with the precision he brought to everything. I inherited both, he had said, the legitimate side and the other side. She thought about 3 interpreters who had found other opportunities. I have a contract, she said. A non-disclosure clause, Marsh said. Yes, we're aware. We can address that legally. There are provisions that supersede contractual non-disclosure in federal matters. I'm aware, Valentina said. I was with the State Department. Marsh looked at her. Something in her assessment recalibrated. Then you know that we're offering you protection, that if you cooperate, we can ensure— I know what you're offering, Valentina said. I need time. How much time? Enough, she said. She stood. She put money on the table for the coffee. She thought about her grandmother's pearls and her mother's voice and the specific quality of choice when you are standing at the place where all your roads converge. Miss Greco, Marsh said, you know what you're inside. I do, Valentina said. You know that it will eventually— I know, Valentina said. Everything ends. She walked back to Meridian Tower in the May morning, and the lake was blue for the first time since February, and the city was alive around her with the energy of spring, and she walked through it all with the particular, focused calm of someone who has made a decision and is carrying it quietly until the moment it needs to be said. She went to the 48th floor. She went to Luca's office. She closed the door behind her. He looked up from his desk with the expression that was his specific expression for her, the professional surface and everything underneath it, visible to anyone who knew how to look. Sit down, she said. He looked at her. You're telling me to sit down? Yes, she said. He sat. She told him about Agent Marsh. She told him the full conversation with the precision of the professional interpreter. Every word, the badge number she had memorized, the specific phrasing of the request, what had and hadn't been said about their existing intelligence. His face during this recitation was a masterpiece of controlled response. Not blank, she was past the stage of reading him as blank. What she saw was the rapid, compressed processing of a very intelligent man receiving important information and simultaneously managing a complex internal landscape that included, she was certain, the specific quality of feeling that occurs when you are told someone you have trusted has done something that proves the trust was warranted. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Why did you tell me? He said finally. Not an accusation, a genuine question with real weight. Because you'd find out anyway, she said. Because lying to you requires more energy than I have, and you'd know anyway. Because— She stopped, took a breath. Because we have an arrangement. The real one, not the contract. He looked at her. The real one, he said. The one that exists between people who have told each other the truth about things, she said. Yes,
That one. He stood from his desk. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her and put his hands on her face, both of them, with the specific, tender exactness of someone holding something irreplaceable. "I'm going to fix this," he said. "The Marsh situation. The Hargrove situation. The whole arrangement. It's going to change." "Change how?" she said. "Completely," he said. "I've been—" He paused. The specific pause of a man who has been moving toward a decision for a long time and has just arrived at it. "I've been considering it for longer than this situation requires, but this, what you just did, what you just chose, makes the path clear." She looked at him. "You're talking about leaving it," she said. "The operational side," he said. "The infrastructure, the arrangements." He said arrangements, with a specific emphasis that covered everything. "I can't—" Another pause, more careful. "I don't want to be the reason you have to choose between protecting yourself and staying." "I've been choosing every day for months," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you have. And I have let you make that choice when I should have—" He stopped, started again. "When I should have made mine first." She looked at him, at his face, which had, in this room with the May light coming in off the lake and the door closed and no one watching, its full expression, unmanaged, unguarded, completely his. "How long will it take?" she said. "Longer than I want," he said. "These things don't dissolve overnight. But I have a plan. I've had the outline of one for some time. I need you to be patient, and I need you to be careful, and I need you to—" He paused. "Stay." "I'm still here," she said, as she had said before. He kissed her forehead, with his lips pressed warm and specific against her temple, and held her face in his hands, and said her name once, in Italian, the full 4 syllables. It was, in any language she knew, the sound of something decided. June came with the speed of things that have been held back for too long. The Marchetti complication reached its climax on a Tuesday. Gianluca, who had been operating without his father's restraint or his father's understanding of the architecture he was disrupting, made a move that collapsed a significant portion of the operational structure he'd been rattling for months. The Gary facility, the Hammond facility, the shell companies that connected them, exposed not to federal investigation, but to 3 separate families whose interests converged on the mess Gianluca had made of their shared infrastructure. Valentina spent 4 consecutive days translating across 12 separate meetings: Russian, Italian, Sicilian, and at one point an extraordinary hybrid of Neapolitan dialect and English that required her to concentrate at a level she had not been required to reach since her State Department days. She worked with the complete, sustained focus of a woman who understood that this was the crisis, the one that had been building since October, and that how it resolved would determine the shape of everything that came after. Luca moved through this period like the center of a storm, perfectly still at the core, the surrounding situation in motion, his attention absolute and distributed and entirely controlled. She watched him negotiate with the Volkov family, who were furious, with what remained of the Marchetti interests, represented now by Don Enzo's more measured son-in-law, with Salvatore De Luca, who had interests of his own and made his concerns known in the specific vocabulary of old-world Italian authority. She translated all of it. She also, quietly and without announcement, made a phone call. She called Agent Marsh and told her she was not able to cooperate at this time, and that she understood the implications of this decision. Marsh was careful, professional, and clear. The investigation would continue, and Valentina's decision didn't alter her potential exposure. Valentina acknowledged this. She said she understood. She hung up and sat with it for a moment. The weight of the decision, the specific moral geography of a choice that was not clean and could not be made clean, and was being made anyway because it was the choice of the person she had decided to be, in the world she had decided to inhabit. On the fourth day of meetings, something shifted. She was mid-translation of a complex Russian statement from Irina Volkov about the financial terms of the restructuring arrangement when she saw Luca's face change. Not dramatically, a millimetre of movement, the fractional lowering of a specific muscle around his right eye. But she knew his face well enough to read that millimetre like a paragraph. He had made a decision. After the meeting, when the room was cleared, he turned to Salvatore De Luca and said in Italian, with the precision and formality of a statement that had been prepared, "I want to discuss a structural change, a separation of the operational interests from the investment and logistics infrastructure, a clean division, permanent." De Luca looked at him for a long time. "That's a significant statement," De Luca said. "I've been building toward it for some time," Luca said. "The current situation confirms the timing." "There will be resistance," De Luca said. "I know," Luca said. "I'm asking for your support." Another long look. De Luca was 70, silver-haired, a man who had seen more iterations of this world than Valentina could imagine. And his face in this moment was the face of someone reading the full context of a request rather than merely its surface. He looked at Valentina. She kept her face still. Then he looked back at Luca. "You have it," he said. "Within limits I'll specify, and at a price we'll negotiate." "Understood," Luca said. It was not, she understood this with clarity, the end of something. Clean departures from worlds of this kind did not happen in a single conversation in a corporate meeting room. It was the beginning of an end, which was a different thing, with its own architecture and its own timeline, and she had been a professional interpreter long enough to know that all the most important things happened in stages, with setbacks over time. But it had begun. She thought about this in the elevator going down, standing beside him, neither of them speaking in the way of people who have said the important things in other rooms and are now carrying them quietly. The lobby, the street. The May evening was warm, the city running at its summer energy, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings with its particular quality of light at this hour. Gold at the edges, deep blue at the centre. "You heard all of it," he said. "Everything," she said. "What did you translate internally?" He meant it in the way she understood he meant it, not the actual translation, but the meta-language, the interpretation of what the exchange actually meant. She thought about it. "I translated it as, a man who has been carrying something heavy has decided in the presence of a specific person that he is ready to put it down." He looked at the lake, which was down there at the end of the street, visible between buildings. "That's accurate," he said. "I'm a professional," she said. He made the sound, not quite a laugh, something warmer and more private than that, the sound she had heard perhaps 4 times in the months she had known him, the one that existed only in contexts that were entirely his own. She put her hand through his arm, which was a gesture she had not made before in a public space. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. He let the gesture remain. They walked toward the lake in the June evening, and the city moved around them, and the lake was blue and old, and for a moment, just a moment, the world was exactly the size of the two of them, standing at the edge of it. September. The city had settled into the gold of late summer, the particular quality of light that Chicago earned in September as a kind of compensation for what it extracted in February, and the lake was the colour of hammered metal in the afternoons when Valentina walked home, thinking. 8 months. In 8 months she had gone from a careful, solitary woman sitting at a kitchen counter with cereal and a laptop to a person she was still in the process of recognizing. Someone who knew things she could never unknow, who had made choices that could not be unmade, who was in love with a dangerous and complicated man who was in the process of becoming less dangerous and no less complicated, and who was genuinely, specifically, in the complicated and material way of things that are real rather than theoretical, happy. The restructuring was underway. It was slow, as she had known it would be. The separation of the legitimate from the operational was not a thing that happened overnight in a world of this kind. It was a painstaking, multi-fronted process that required the careful negotiation of every relationship and every arrangement, the construction of new structures to replace the ones being dissolved, and the management of the people who had built their security on the existing world and were not uniformly enthusiastic about its transformation. Luca spent considerable time on the phone and in meetings that she was not required to attend. She understood the deliberateness of this. He was managing her exposure with the same careful attention he had always given to her protection. She found this simultaneously touching and slightly maddening, and said so directly one evening in the penthouse, when he had redirected her from the specific meeting for the 3rd time. "I'm not made of glass," she said. "I know," he said. "Then stop acting like it." He looked at her. "I'm not protecting you from the content," he said. "I'm protecting you from the legal geography. There's a distinction. Explain it. If you're present in certain conversations during this transition, you are potentially a material witness to activities that will come under federal review as the restructuring creates documentation." He said this with the specific legal precision she recognized as something he'd thought through carefully. If you're not present, you're an employee who interpreted in a prior capacity. Those are very different positions. She thought about this, about Agent Marsh, about the phone call she'd made. "I'm already in the legal geography," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm trying to limit the territory." She looked at him for a long moment. "You talked to someone," she said. A pause, the specific pause that confirmed it. "Who?" she said. "An attorney," he said, "not Adrian." "About me specifically?" "About your specific situation," he said. "About how to structure your continued employment in a way that provides the maximum available protection." She sat with this. He had spoken to a lawyer about her, not as a professional consideration, or not only as a professional consideration, as a specific individual priority, the protection of this particular person in this particular situation. "You did that without telling me," she said. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" A slight pause. "When I had something useful to report." She looked at him. "Luca, Valentina. We have an arrangement, she said. The real one. Remember? I remember. The arrangement requires that you tell me things before you've made all the decisions, she said. Not after. Before. So I can participate in them. He looked at her with the expression that had no name in any language. Then he said, with the particular controlled directness of a man choosing honesty over management, old habits. Yes, she said, and you're changing them. And I'm changing them, he said. He looked at the lake. The September lake was gold and pewter in the late afternoon, the colour of transition, the colour of seasons shifting. He looked at it for a long moment. There's something else, he said. She waited. Agent Marsh contacted me directly, he said, 3 weeks ago. She went very still. Through a mutual intermediary, he said. The terms they're proposing, in exchange for cooperation on certain financial documentation related to the restructuring, are significant. And favourable. He looked at her. Favourable specifically to the people they know I would act to protect. She heard the weight of the people they know I would act to protect. Me, she said. Among others, he said. Sophia. Several people in the operational structure who are not principals. People who found themselves inside something without full understanding of what it was. She thought about this, the architecture of it. The federal agency had identified correctly that the way to Luca Ferrante's cooperation was not through threat, but through the thing he valued more than his own security. They figured out what matters to you, she said. Yes, he said. They're good at their jobs. What are you going to do? He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to cooperate on the financial documentation, he said. The things that put the people in question in jeopardy, the arrangements that created their exposure, those I can document and restructure in ways that clarify their involvement or lack thereof. What I won't do is serve as a primary informant on ongoing operations for parties not in my circle. That's a line. They'll push that line, she said. They always do, he said. That's what negotiations are. She looked at him. He was looking at the lake with the expression of someone who has assessed a difficult situation from every available angle and is now sitting with the decision that no angle can make clean. The specific, serious calm of moral seriousness in an imperfect world. I'll support whatever you decide, she said. He looked at her. That's not what I need from you, he said. What do you need? Your honest assessment, he said. Your read on it. The same thing you give me in every room. She thought about it. She thought about the full scope of what she knew. The senator's name, the facilities, the families, the financial structures, and what would happen if all of it came into legal focus versus what would happen if the restructuring moved forward cleanly and the cooperation with Marsh was limited to financial documentation. I think, she said carefully, that there's a version of this that protects the people who need protecting and moves the operations toward legitimate structure without requiring you to burn everything down. A pause. I think it requires you to trust a federal agent's assessment of what's adequate, which is uncomfortable. Extremely, he said. But it's available, she said, if you want it. He looked at her. I want it, he said. It was the simplest thing he had ever said to her. October came around again, and the city began its annual performance of beauty before the cold, the trees in Lincoln Park turning amber and copper and gold, the lake in the mornings having that quality of absolute clarity that belongs only to very cold water under very clean sky, the specific gift of a Chicago autumn before Chicago winter removed the gift and sent everyone inside to wait. 1 year. She sat with that over her morning coffee, the real coffee, the excellent Italian roast that had appeared in her kitchen in August and which she chose not to examine too carefully in terms of how it had arrived, and thought about October, 12 months ago, and the elevator climbing to the 48th floor, and the frosted glass doors, and the man at the window with his back turned, who had known she was there before she spoke. The year had changed her. She was still taking inventory of how. She was still an interpreter. She had taken on new clients, 2 corporations with legitimate multinational negotiations, a cultural organization, a legal firm that worked in international arbitration. She had business cards. She had a professional structure that was entirely separate from Meridian Tower and entirely hers. She had, with the help of a very good attorney, whom Luca had not hired, but whom Luca had, when pressed, admitted to recommending, navigated her legal geography to a position of relative safety. She had given a statement to Agent Marsh, limited, specific, focused on financial documentation related to the restructuring. She had done it with Luca's knowledge, and after a long conversation that had lasted most of a night, with his support. "This protects you," he had said. "It also helps them build a case," she said. "A case that, if built correctly, results in a structured outcome rather than a collapsed one," he said, "which protects more people." She had looked at him. "You've been thinking about this like an argument you need to win." "I've been thinking about it like a problem with multiple stakeholders," he said, "which is what it is. And I'm one of the stakeholders. The primary one," he said. The restructuring was, by October, approximately 7 months into a process that would take 18. Luca's cooperation with the financial documentation had produced, as he had negotiated, a federal framework that managed the exposure of the operational structure without requiring wholesale prosecution of the human beings inside it. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was the kind of outcome that was available in the real world rather than the clean world, and she had made her peace with it in the way that she made peace with most things, by understanding it completely. Gianluca Marchetti, as a footnote, had been removed from the situation by the Marchetti family's remaining interests. Not physically, which she had briefly and somewhat shamefully imagined, but professionally, repositioned to the Napoli operations where his father's influence had been sufficient to contain him, and where his particular brand of combustible inexperience was less likely to set things on fire. Senator Hargrove was no longer a senator. He had resigned in July, citing health reasons that were entirely unrelated to and entirely a consequence of the financial documentation that had quietly arrived in certain federal offices as part of the restructuring process. She had not translated the document that contained his name. Someone else had. She was glad about this, without being entirely clear on why. Irina Volkov had retreated to Vladivostok with the composed, Arctic dignity of a woman who knew she had lost a round and intended to consider her next move at length. Valentina thought about her occasionally, with the specific feeling of someone thinking about a complicated person whom they would never entirely like and never entirely dismiss. It was a Tuesday in October when Luca appeared in her office. Not the office at Meridian Tower, she had a different office now, in a building 6 blocks away, which was entirely hers and which had a good view and books on the shelves and the Italian coffee and nothing on the walls except one painting that she had bought at a gallery opening in July without telling him, and which he had noticed the second time he came to the office and stood in front of for a full minute. He appeared in the doorway at 11 in the morning and leaned against the frame in the way she recognized, not quite the professional precision of Meridian Tower, not quite the private ease of the penthouse, something in between. The particular posture of someone who is showing up in a context that is entirely another person's territory. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. She looked at him. "You're asking before deciding," she said. "Old habits," he said. "Changed habits," she said. He came into the office. He looked at the painting, which he had looked at every single time, without exception, with the specific quality of attention he gave to things that had moved him in some way he hadn't expected. Then he looked at her. "Geneva," he said. She waited. "Sophia has been specific in her suggestions," he said, "about the conference interpretation work, about the city." A pause. "About the kind of life that's available there." "Have you been talking to your sister about my life?" she said. "She's been talking to me about your life," he said, which was almost certainly true and completely not the point. "I have been—" He paused, with the specific, careful pause of someone in unfamiliar linguistic territory. "I have been thinking about what comes next, for both of us, jointly." She looked at him. The October light was in his face, clear and specific, the honest light of autumn. "What comes next?" she said. "Yes." "Jointly," she said. "Yes." She thought about the language she had been acquiring for a year. The full grammar of him, the vocabulary of his silences and his gestures, and the specific ways his face moved and didn't move, the idioms of his particular form of care, the syntax of a man who expressed enormous things in careful, understated constructions. "Ask the question," she said, "the actual question, not the preamble." He looked at her for a moment. His face, unguarded, completely his, the face she had been reading like a language since October and had never entirely finished translating, because there was always more, always the specific delight of more. "Come to Geneva with me," he said. "Not for Sophia's contacts, not for the work." A pause, the smallest pause. "For me, for what we are, in a city where we can—" He stopped, started again. "In a city that doesn't have the weight of the year in it." She thought about it. She thought about the year, the weight and the complexity and the beauty and the fear and the specific quality of everything she had chosen with her eyes open. She thought about her grandmother's pearls, and her mother's voice, and the cereal at midnight, and the number on the contract, and the first meeting, and the look across the conference table, and the November dining room, and the January flight, and the penthouse, and the Sunday morning eggs. She thought about what it meant to know someone completely. "Yes," she said. He was very still. "Yes," she said again. The actual answer, not the preamble. Something happened in his face. The almost smile, which was real now, had been real for months, available when no one else was watching, and sometimes when they were, a concession to happiness that the professional architecture no longer entirely contained. It moved in his face like light across water, the specific warmth of a man who has stopped managing his own joy. "Good," he said. "Good," she agreed. The October morning was clear outside her window. The lake was out there somewhere, pewter and gold. The city was alive around them with the ordinary miracle of its ordinary self. And the language between them, the language that had no word in Italian or Russian or Mandarin or German or Sicilian or any of the 6 languages they carried between them, said everything that mattered, exactly as it always had. In the translation that required no translator. Geneva in December was exactly what Sophia had said it would be. A city of extraordinary cleanliness and extraordinary complication, of old money and international intrigue, and the specific quality of discreet sophistication that belongs to cities where the important things have been happening quietly for a very long time. The lake, Lac Léman, was something else entirely, nothing like Chicago's vast industrial horizon line, but intimate and alpine and startlingly beautiful, the snow-covered mountains reflected in the water on clear days with a precision that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. They took an apartment in the Cologne quarter, above the lake, with a terrace that in the mornings held the particular cold clarity of a December alpine dawn, and in the evenings, when the city lights came on, looked like the world had arranged itself specifically to be beautiful. Sophia came for dinner twice in the first week. She arrived each time with wine and cheese, and the particular energy of someone for whom the arrival of her brother in a city with a person she liked constituted an occasion worth celebrating. She was, as she always was, herself, unmodified, direct, warm, with the quality of deep, unperformed intelligence that Valentina found endlessly engaging. "You look well," Sophia said to Luca, with the assessing candour of a sister who has been worried for a long time and is deciding whether to stop. "I am," he said. Sophia looked at Valentina with the specific expression of someone verifying a claim. Valentina looked back with the expression of someone who was capable of verifying it herself. "Good," Sophia said. That was all. It was enough. Valentina's work in Geneva was genuine, and she found genuinely excellent. The conference interpretation community was substantial, the work intellectually demanding in ways she had missed during months of specialized professional service. And the city offered the clean, professional distance from the weight of the previous year that she had needed without quite knowing it. She worked 3 days a week in the early weeks, more as the winter progressed, building the independent structure of a life that was specifically and entirely hers. Luca worked from Geneva with the efficient flexibility of a man whose legitimate operations, the ones that were, by the beginning of December, the primary operations, were international in scope and structurally independent of physical location. He had meetings, calls, the ongoing administrative architecture of a large and complex enterprise in the process of becoming what it was always also supposed to be. He was, she observed, better at the legitimate side than he had perhaps allowed himself to believe. The intelligence and precision and attentiveness that had been the qualities of a world with very specific demands were, it turned out, equally valuable in a world with more civilized ones. He was, she thought, finding the transition more natural than he had expected. She told him this. He looked at her from across the table where he had been working, the same expression, the deep water eyes, the face that had become as familiar to her as her own. "It's easier," he said, "when there's somewhere to be going toward." She looked at him. "Say the rest," she said. He set down his pen. He looked at her with the full, undivided attention that was his particular quality. "You are the somewhere," he said. The simplicity of it made her breath catch, not because it was surprising — she had known for months what she was to him — but because he had said it without the careful management of a man protecting himself, just the plain, honest statement of a truth that had been true for a long time and was now, apparently, something he was choosing to carry without armour. "Luca," she said. "Valentina," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I knew," she said, "from the first month, what your world was, what the work actually involved. I made the choice to stay, not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it completely, and I understood you, and I decided that—" She stopped, collected herself, continued. "I decided that you were worth the complication, that the world you were building toward was worth staying for, that you were—" She stopped again. "Worth it," she said, "completely." He was very still. "I want you to know that," she said, "that it was a choice, that it's always been a choice, not circumstance, not contract, not the professional arrangement." She looked at him steadily. "You." The silence in the Geneva apartment was deep and clean, the silence of a city that knew how to keep its own counsel. Outside, the lake held the last of the December light, and the mountains were darkening at their edges, and the world was in the specific quality of suspension that belongs to evenings that are about to become something else. He stood from the table. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, close, in the specific proximity that had moved from calculated distance to something that felt like home, and he put his hands on her face and looked at her. "I know," he said. "I've always known. It's the thing about you." He stopped, with the quality of someone choosing, with great care, from an extensive vocabulary. "You see everything, and you stay. You understand everything, and you stay. There is no—" He paused. "There is no more honest declaration of feeling in any language than the act of staying when you know fully what you're staying for." She looked at him. "That's the most eloquent thing you've ever said to me," she said. "I've been working on it," he said, the almost smile, the real one, the one that had been almost and then real and was now simply his. The expression of a man who had discovered at some point in the last 12 months that the thing he had been managing against feeling was not going to be managed, and that this was not, as it turned out, the loss he had feared, but something else entirely. She kissed him. He kissed her back with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who is not managing a timeline, not containing a feeling, not protecting an exposure. Just present, entirely, fully, with no part of himself held back for professional purposes. When they pulled apart, she pressed her forehead against his and closed her eyes. "Tell me something in a language I don't speak," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something in a language she didn't recognize. 2 syllables, soft, with the quality of something very old and very small and specific to a moment. His mother's language, she would learn later. A regional dialect from a village in the Russian interior that had no written form and perhaps 30 living speakers. Something his mother had said to him when he was very small and that he had kept, the way he had kept all the things that mattered, quietly and completely, without making a show of it. "What does it mean?" she said. He pulled back, looked at her. "Mine," he said. "It means mine. But—" He paused, with the careful precision of a translator choosing the full sense of a word rather than its simple equivalent. In the sense of what I am responsible for, what I keep safe, what is essential. He paused one more time, and she felt in the pause the full weight of what he was telling her. There's no single word translation. She looked at him for a long time. No, she said, there isn't. The lake outside was still and dark, reflecting the last light of the December sky with the precision of something that had been doing this for thousands of years, and would continue doing it long after the people on its shores had moved on, or changed, or built something new from what they had and what they were, and what they had chosen to become. She pressed her palm flat against his chest. His heartbeat, steady, exactly as it always was. I'll learn the word, she said. He put his hand over hers. You already know what it means, he said. She did. In every language he had ever learned, in Italian and Russian and Mandarin and German and Sicilian, in the Neapolitan dialect and the Calabrian interior, and the Sicilian 19th century idiom of an 81-year-old woman on a cold New York pavement. The word that meant mine, in the sense of what I keep safe, what I am responsible for, what is essential, was always the same underneath. It was the word she had been translating for a year. It was the word that had no single equivalent in any language. It was this room, this light, this man, this life she had chosen with her eyes open and her mind clear, and her heart, at some point in the last 12 months, entirely given. She stood in the Geneva apartment with her palm on his chest, and the lake outside, and the mountains going dark at their edges, and she thought about October 12 months ago. The elevator climbing, the frosted glass, the man at the window with his back turned, and the specific quality of the moment when he turned around and looked at her and said, "Sit down," in Italian. And she had sat, and, in sitting, had begun. She thought about everything that had happened in the space between that beginning and this evening. She thought about every word she had translated, every secret she had carried, every choice she had made with full awareness of what it cost and what it was worth. She thought about language, the great, beautiful, impossible project of it, the attempt of human beings to build a bridge out of sound between the interior of oneself and the interior of another. Always approximate, always falling short in the specific ways that matter, and arriving sometimes in the exact place that matters most. She thought about the words that had no translation, the ones that existed in a single language for a reason, because the specific quality of feeling they named had existed first in the culture that built the word, and the word was the only way to keep it. She was building that language now, with him. The private language of two specific people, the vocabulary of his Sunday morning kitchen and her midnight cereal, of his hands on her face and her translation of his silences, of the penthouse and the lake and the November dining room and the January flight, and all the particular, irreplaceable words of a year that had remade her entirely into someone she was still in the process of meeting. Mine in the old Russian village dialect. Mine in the sense of essential. She leaned into him, and the city outside went on being beautiful, and the lake reflected everything, and the mountains stood in their patient, ancient attendance, and the December dark came down quietly over all of it, and she thought, yes, this, already, still, always. She thought it in all 6 languages she carried. She thought it in the one that needed no language at all. And then she stopped thinking, and she was simply here, in the only translation that had ever mattered, the full, unguarded, complete presence of a person who had chosen to stay.